Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island's story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my two comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The size of the UK's nuclear submarine fleet could double under a new defence deal with America and Australia.
Good morning. At 6 o'clock on Tuesday, the 14th of March. This is Breakfast on GB News with Eamonn, Holmes and Isabel Webster.
And leading the news this morning, the Prime Minister has vowed to keep the oceans free as he announces a major deal with the United States and Australia to build a new fleet of nuclear submarines. Speaking to GB News, Rishi Sunak said he's doing what's necessary to keep the country safe.
It's increasingly clear that China is a country that does have different values to ours. It poses a systemic challenge and its behaviour is concerning. More authoritarian at home, more assertive overseas. And in light of that, it's right that we take the steps that are necessary to protect ourselves and to stand up for our values.
The Chancellor will move to stop people from retiring early by boosting the tax-free allowance for pensions to its highest level on record. It'll be included in his budget tomorrow and could see the allowance raised by £500,000.
Chairman of the BBC is under pressure to resign following a climb down in its standoff with Gary Lineker. Yesterday, the corporation's Director General announced a review of its social media guidelines and apologised for grey areas.
A man's died following a gas blast that destroyed a house in Swansea. 3 others were taken to hospital following the explosion, which shook houses miles away.
And the paedophile, former pop star Gary Glitter, has been recalled to prison for breaching bail conditions. An investigation found he was using a smartphone to access the so-called dark web a month after his release from jail.
And you know we love to hear from you throughout the programme. We are the People's Channel, so do send us an email, send us a tweet via gbnews at gbnews.uk or at gbnews. And don't forget, we'd love to know where you're watching or listening from.
And just want to say thanks for your company this morning. We're with you until 9:30. OK, so the Prime Minister has vowed to stand shoulder to shoulder against aggression from China as he announced a new deal to build nuclear submarines in England.
The agreement, unveiled alongside President Joe Biden and Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, could see the size of the country's nuclear fleet double.
Speaking to our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, he said he's doing what's necessary to keep the country safe.
Our approach is completely aligned with that of our closest allies. America, Australia, Japan, Canada, all of us are on the same page in how we think about China, how we're approaching it. And I'd say to everyone, know that our allies as a country are all working together, we share the same view and we'll act together.
OK, joining us now in the studio, the editor of Spiked magazine, we say good morning to Tom Slater. Tom, good to see you. What is the significance of this deal?
I think it's hugely significant in terms of the ratcheting up of the tensions between the West and China. You'll have noticed in that press conference, all of the three leaders there were very careful not to single out China, but that's really what the point of this initiative is in terms of that tilt towards the Indo-Pacific increasing. Australia's particular capability, giving them this fleet of nuclear subs, we should stress that's nuclear-powered in terms of propelled, not necessarily armed, but nevertheless, it still represents a significant escalation.
Actually, that's a very interesting point you made, because I just automatically assumed what would the point be of having them if they weren't nuclear-armed?
But no, it's actually just to power them. So this is all because, not least because Australia isn't a nuclear-powered state. And that was another thing that they were very... in the press conference, Joe Biden mentioned several times that they wouldn't actually be nuclear-armed. Because, again, there's this desire, and you see it particularly with Rishi Sunak in the comments that he's made, talking about a challenge rather than a threat and so on, which is to continue to up the ante in certain respects, whilst also trying to walk this tightrope of not being seen to be too escalatory. I think the problem is when you look at the reaction in China from the various kind of pundits and propagandists in their particular news outlets, those distinctions don't seem to wash too much.
So we're going to be waiting, how many years, 25 years or so, before these submarines...
We're talking decades, yeah.
...come online, and they ain't going to be nuclear-powered.
They're nuclear-powered, not nuclear-armed.
Well, they're not going to be nuclear-armed, sorry. Right.
So, but it's a longer-term...
I'm very unimpressed.
It's a longer-term decision, as you say. It's something which, despite all the fanfare, is something that's projected much more into the future. There is a question about how significant this will be. But in the context of everything else that's going on, US sanctions on China, some Western naval exercises near Taiwan and so on, it is going to be interpreted very much as a raising of the stakes.
And just explain a little bit about how it's all going to work, because my understanding is it's going to be American-designed nuclear-powered submarines built here in the UK, so great for jobs, great for the industry that already exists, sort of doubling the size of that, and then crewed by the Australians.
Yeah, so it's essentially a kind of pooling of resources between the three different powers, as you say, having significant benefits to the industrial bases of the countries involved. And it's kind of beginning with members of the Australian Navy effectively starting to be deployed within certain US and American bases as a kind of form of training them up whilst the technology is developed and the submarines are actually built.
So the Prime Minister sits down in that Sea Bay view there, and he gets everybody from every TV station to come and interview him. Where and why did the Elgin marbles pop up, and who cares?
It was interesting that this has been raised. I guess it's been something which has been bubbling up as a discussion because of the fact that there have been these kind of secret talks that have been going on between the Greek government and George Osborne, as one of his many jobs is to head up the British Museum. And I think one of the reasons it became a bit more of a sore spot was because it came up, Rishi Sunak originally kind of just deflected the question. He said, that's a matter for the British Museum. And then realising that that wasn't the line one should take on these matters, then toughened up the language to say, the British Museum has a legal obligation to hold on to its collections. We're not going to change that position and so on. But it was a strange question to kind of ricochet out of that particular press junket, given the fact that we were there seemingly to talk about submarines. So
what about...
I just want to ask people, Isabel, what do you think, listening and watching at home, what do you think about the Elgin marbles? Should we keep them? Should Greece have them back? Do you have no view on it at all? Just let us know this morning.
What's your view?
I think... I don't really know what I think.
Yeah.
I am a classic scholar, and I can appreciate where they came from and the whole history. So I suppose, ultimately, they probably should be returned.
Yeah, on the hoof, yeah, off the cuff. Look, I want to ask, about the relationship between particularly the Prime Minister and President Biden. I mean, President Biden doing his, too cool for school, Ray-Bans on look. This formal invitation extended to come over for the Good Friday Agreement. We'd heard all the sort of rumours about it, but now that's formalised. And then this return invitation to DC in June. This early on in Rishi Sunak's premiership, he can be delighted with this kind of rapport that he's developed, can't he?
He'll be very happy with that, not least because it was only a few months ago that Joe Biden was calling him Rashid Sunak. So, he's actually impressed himself upon the president now. Again, as you say, he was almost too helpful to Sunak at one point, talking about how, he's a California man, really, welcome home and so on, which is not useful necessarily for his UK cred. But I think what Rishi Sunak has done and what's been keen to be doing in recent weeks with all of these international meetings that he's been having and big diplomatic announcements is particularly when you've got a Prime Minister who's in a bit of a rocky position with his electorate at home, being on the world stage to boost your kind of sense of authority and so on becomes particularly attractive to them, and I think he'll be pretty happy with the way things have gone at this point.
Tom, appreciate your take on things. Thank you very much indeed. Tom Slater is the editor of Spiked. The government's illegal migration bill's cleared its first hurdle after it passed its second reading in the Commons. That despite concerns from some Conservative MPs.
Well, at the dispatch box last night, the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman, launched a fiery defence of her legislation. Let's take a listen.
I will not be hectored by out-of-touch lefties, or anyone, for that matter. I won't be patronised. I won't be patronised on what appropriate views for someone of my background can hold. And I will not back down when faced with spurious accusations of bigotry.
Well, that's assuming that if you're a person of colour, you cannot be discriminatory or a bigot in any way. Your views welcome.
Yes, well, let's get the views now of the immigration lawyer Skylar McKeith. Interesting to hear the Home Secretary call detractors of her bill lefties, given that there were some fairly high-profile objectors from within her own party, not least a former Prime Minister who didn't actually vote last night.
That's right. So Theresa May does oppose her bill. And so it's not necessarily just lefties that are in opposition to it. So there are people from her own party. And the bill starts with a statement by the Home Secretary that she's unable to say that its provisions are compatible with the rights in the ECHR. And admission of potential incompatibility with the ECHR is an acknowledgement that the bill could lead to a breach of its international obligations under the ECHR. Now, it's unusual for a British government to declare itself in advance to be open to breaching international law. And so making this type of statement, it's known as a Section 19(1)(b) statement, it does not necessarily evidence a lack of respect for human rights. It just shows that the government is taking the task of assessing the human rights implications of this legislation and considers that there are reasons for considering that it's in the public interest to take the risk of incompatibility. And the purpose of this legislation is to deter illegal migration, but the bill cannot necessarily in practice prevent that. And so one of the ways the government plans to deter illegal migration is by threatening asylum seekers with removal to a safe third country. But agreements must be in place with the safe third country to be able to send the person to that country. And so the bill creates a large number of people potentially having to live in limbo at public expense for an unknown amount of time, which could become very costly for the UK taxpayer. So really, the Home Office needs to put in place agreements for removal with safe third countries to ensure that they're not in breach of their own legislation.
Around the position of children, pregnant women and the like, with Robert Buckland, again another Conservative, expressing concern on that very point on this channel to Camilla Tominey on Sunday.
Yes, so Clause 3 of this bill aims to make the duty to remove discretionary for unaccompanied children until they turn 18. And it would give the Home Secretary power to make other exceptions to the duty as well. And so the protective arrangements intended for all children would effectively be withdrawn for children entering after the 7th of March. And so the bill may undermine legal protections in the Children Act 1989 for unaccompanied migrant children. So that is a concern. That's a concern amongst the left and also the right. a number of provisions in this bill have retrospective effect. And so the government, they did not provide justification for implementing provisions that will apply retrospectively. And retrospective lawmaking may undermine the rule of law as well. And where Parliament has passed legislation knowing that it may be in breach of the Convention, the courts will consider that it has chosen to do so. So as Parliament is sovereign, it will give that due respect, but that will not necessarily stop the courts from finding the act to be incompatible with the convention. So it's for Parliament to consider.
Yeah, and look, with all of that in mind, the majority in the Commons last night didn't have a problem with the bill and accepting what Suella Braverman was saying, that the vast majority of Brits are not xenophobic, and going on to state that the vast majority of those people coming across the Channel are economic migrants under the age of 40, predominantly male, which is clearly gaming the system, as she put it.
Yeah, absolutely. There still are many more stages for the bill to go through before it could receive royal assent. But the government does need to implement a new strategy. The Home Office is overwhelmed with the asylum applications. There's a major backlog of these applications, and the current system that's in place is unsustainable. But it's likely that we are going to see this bill being faced with much more backlash and potential legal challenges.
McKay, thank you very much indeed. Skylar is an immigration lawyer.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. 13 minutes past 6, with the cost of food continuing to reach record highs. Households up and down the country are desperate for more support from the government.
And as a result, many will be looking to the Chancellor, Jeremy Hunt, as he sets out his big spring budget tomorrow. Well, our North West reporter, Sophie Reaper, has been to a food bank in Bolton and has this report.
Bag after bag of food. The people filling them left with no other choice. Their situations are often desperate, with nowhere else to turn but their local food bank.
Just basically struggling with not working. It just helps you out. They're very good here. They look after you. They give you a load of food and stuff, and it's a great place to be, and they're lovely to get along with.
Compared to this time last year, food and non-alcoholic drink prices have risen by an average of 16.8%. According to the Office for National Statistics, last month over half of UK adults admitted to buying less food as a result.
Here in Bolton, things are very much the same as they are everywhere else in the UK. With the cost of food and drink higher than it ever has been before, people are struggling to cope.
We've got people who come here, and although we've got people who's homeless, we've got people who's unemployed, we've got people who are working. You know, we supply food to NHS staff and other people. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. If you need it, come.
With the spring budget tomorrow, people will desperately be hoping for improved support from the government. But if that doesn't come, many will be out of options.
More and more people talk to us and they're feeling down, they're feeling depressed, they're feeling, in a lot of cases, they're feeling suicidal. And unfortunately, we've had a lot of people who we supported who's actually died. I mean, for various reasons. Some have actually committed suicide, but at the end of the day, all we're trying to do is, we're not giving a hand out, we're giving a hand up to people who've fallen on hard times.
Be Nice recently opened a second premises owing to the sheer number of people who need their help.
The reason I volunteer for Bolton Nice is because I've got a lot of time in my hand, I'm retired. Best way for me to give the time is to give it to Bolton Nice as a volunteer, giving food out to the people and help them at whatever way I can help them.
With support from volunteers and donations from the local community, Be Nice are able to help dozens of people every single day. But they can only do so much to help people survive this cost of living crisis. Sophie Reaper, GB News.
And
Time
if it
just
is...
after 6:15. Isabel's an important announcement to make.
I was going to say, if you're interested in the budget, which we should all be, Eamonn, we have a full day of coverage here on GB News, so stay tuned for that tomorrow. That's all I was
Has
going to say.
anybody ever come out of a budget and thought, I'm really a lot better off as a result of that? It's really affected my life.
Well, it does. It might make you better off or worse off, but it is all important because you should take an interest, Eamonn. This is, where your taxes all go.
It's all important. Let us
for
know
your
how
accountant.
important it is to you. Thank you. 17 minutes past 6, bringing you up to date with the rest of today's news stories.
It's a budget story to kick off the bulletin.
Yeah, the Chancellor is looking at increasing the lifetime pension allowance, whatever that means, in an attempt to reverse the trend of early retirements. Now, it's understood Jeremy Hunt is considering allowing you to put more money into your pension pot before being taxed as part of the budget package.
The paedophile Gary Glitter has been sent back to jail for breaking bail conditions less than 6 weeks after being released. The 78-year-old had been freed last month after being jailed in 2015 for sexually abusing schoolgirls. He reportedly bragged about accessing the dark web in his bail hostel.
Accessing. OK, so Bryant May will be awarded a knighthood later today at Buckingham Palace after being recognised in the New Year honours for his services to music and charity. The Queen guitarist is known for some of the most iconic riffs in popular music, including the famous solo on Do Not Stop Me Now. That Gary Glitter situation, what would you do with Gary Glitter?
Oh,
Let
don't
us
ask.
know this morning.
Don't ask me.
So he was returned to jail because they found out that he was on his mobile device accessing what is called the dark web and obviously accessing things that he shouldn't be. But this man obviously is sick, really sick in the head.
Can you ever stop being a paedophile, is the question.
Is jail the right place for him? Or should there be some other solution to someone like Gary Glitter? He's 78 years of age. Is he still capable of the unspeakable hurt that he has caused? 18 minutes past 6.
Stay with us. Still to come, we'll be asking, are you having a midlife crisis? We'll be speaking to a doctor who specialises in them, and we'll be finding out the best ways to cope if you are.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners on TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Join me, Patrick Christie's, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6. We tackle the day's news agenda like you've never seen before. It's high tempo, high octane, the most controversial topics, and the best guests. You will not be able to take your eyes and ears off it. I'm not afraid to ask the questions that you really want answered. 3 till 6 p.m, Monday to Friday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
and you're up and awake and talking to us today. Elgin marbles, what are folks saying?
Well, they are saying, Chris has said we should keep the marbles. They've been well looked after, and if we never removed them, they probably would not be around now. Soon Lincolnshire says apparently the Ottoman Empire in the 18th century allowed the British ambassador to remove the marbles.
But Greece now wants them back.
Yeah, and Ken says Greece should be grateful to Britain for taking care of them. So there we go. You seem to be not a fan of handing them back. So keep those thoughts coming in.
You know what I'm not a fan of?
What?
Free museums.
Oh, gosh. What's wrong with you?
Oh, sorry. Why am I paying from some tourist from Greece or Albania
Is it only tourists that
America?
go to the National Museum?
They should pay.
OK, fine. Introduce a fee for
Right,
foreigners.
If you go to the museum in Cairo, the Egyptian museum, you
pay.
Right,
Mm.
and any museum abroad I know.
But I think
pay.
it's absolutely wonderful that you can walk into the Natural History Museum or the V&A or whatever it might be, the National Portrait Gallery, you name it, and you can just go in from any background, doesn't matter how much it costs, and enjoy all that culture for free. I think it's
But we're not
absolutely
enjoying
wonderful.
them. It's tourists
No,
from
we
around the
are.
world. We are
are
paying for
Well,
tourists
you might
around
not
the
be.
world.
You and I need to
You're
get to the
paying for
Royal Academy or whatever it is. We were talking about going to
Well,
that
I'm
the other
happy to
day.
pay for it.
Well, yeah, but, you know,
But
not
actually,
everyone
I'm
can.
more likely, I would like to be free because I am a British citizen, right? I'm a UK citizen, therefore I should have it free. But if you're from Venezuela,
Yeah, that's fine.
you
I
should
don't have a
be
problem
paying
with
for
that.
it.
There we go. We'll agree with. Well, there's a compromise.
What's wrong
Problem
with you?
solved.
So you're actually agreeing with me?
Yeah.
Right, there we go.
Right, it's 6:23. We're already falling out. Still to come on today's programme, just before 7. We're going to be speaking to the Minister for Security, Tom Tugendhat, as the Prime Minister has announced the UK will build a new fleet of nuclear-powered submarines.
At 7:20, International Day of Mathematics.
Oh, dear.
Today. Oh, dear. You can have my share of it. Anyway, he's a lovely fella. He's Bobby Siegel. He's a maths teacher, University Challenge star. He'll be here telling us why it is so important to challenge your own mental arithmetic.
You're going to be challenged, just to warn you. So, you know, you might be, rolling your eyes at the budget, but these things are going to come to bite you later on. Looking forward to that. Get in touch all the usual ways. We love to hear from you. Keep those thoughts coming in. GBViews at gbnews.uk or tweet us at GBNews.
Now, this is a nonsense story. I mean, it's a nonsense story that I think that a midlife crisis happens to anybody at any stage. We're talking about midlife crisis, and they're going to say, old men like me go out and buy
I think you're
fancy
past
cars.
midlife. I think I'm midlife now. I think...
Well, I've bought the car, done that sort of thing, right? And all I need is to get the young girlfriend.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
That's when it's
the next
official.
thing as well. 1 in 5 people between 40 and 60 years of age will go through this crisis. But why do people feel the need to behave in this way? And can you avoid it? Why would you want to avoid it? Let's speak to chartered psychologist and author of the Midlife Crisis Handbook. We welcome Dr. Julie Hannon.
Good morning.
Julie, do women go through a midlife crisis?
Oh, yes, definitely, definitely. A midlife crisis doesn't care who it hits, really. So, yeah.
So what do women do? That men stereotypically get a younger version and they get a bigger car. What do women do?
Well, I think it's... Well, they can certainly do the same. And so they do anything that needs to kind of spark interest, really. I think a lot of people get to their 40s to 60s and the midlife malaise kicks in. So then it's a way of kind of re-sparking your life, re-sparking interest. And so some women will buy a car, some people will change their job. So it can all depend.
Right, so Eamonn said, why would you want to avoid it? My perception, having until very recently been looking at middle-aged from afar, has been that the midlife crisis is really just setting fire to your life, and actually a lot of people probably regret some of the decisions they make. They could have a wonderful family unit, the grass isn't always greener, they go off with some airhead.
They need a boring life.
Let me finish my point.
Okay.
And, is that the case? What's the evidence to show that actually it's a good or a bad idea to indulge your midlife crisis?
Well, a lot of people would say that a midlife crisis is an existential necessity, so that you are... So a midlife crisis is an identity crisis. So a lot of people don't update their values and the way that they live their life from those early 20 years. And, of course, if you look at the values of an adolescent, they might be power, success, less money. And then if you compare the values of a 40 to 60-year-old, that might be more about autonomy, freedom, contribution, giving back. So therefore, what you need to do is align your life with your current values, but a lot of people don't do that self-reflective work.
Doctor, I so agree. I so agree with everything you're saying there. Are you actually...
Is there a but? There's a but coming.
Yeah, but are you saying that it's necessarily a bad thing?
No.
Yes.
It's not a bad thing. Some of the choices people make can turn out to be quite a bad thing because they're very impulsive choices to make quick decisions, change your identity immediately. But the midlife crisis can be really useful because you can stay with your same partner, keep the same car, just align your life accordingly.
What you do is you go to more funerals.
You definitely do.
And I think that affects the way you think. You think that you've worked very hard over the years. Maybe you look around and you think things aren't the way they should be.
Yeah.
I mightn't have many years left. And I should enjoy what's there.
Absolutely. I think mortality and the awareness of mortality is definitely a factor, especially for that sandwich generation. So you've got a lot of people who've still got teenage children and elderly parents. So you've got dependents on both sides. So there is a lot of death. And, of course, the suicide rates for men, particularly in their 50s, are very high as well.
But, you know, when we think of the cliche of a midlife crisis, you think of people that shouldn't really be wearing leather jackets or, you know, buying a Ferrari or I don't know, joining a band or something. Can you have a midlife crisis without embarrassing yourself?
Hopefully, yes.
What's the best way to do that then? If you want to spark up your life, have more interest without detonating it and making a fool of yourself?
Yeah, I think what a lot of people do is they're not sure how to live their current lives, so they go back and replay their early years. So that's when the car, the nightclubs, the affairs and everything come into it. But if you stay as you are and actually really examine the different aspects of your life, that be social life, family, how you parent, your career, and update your values and align the two together, then you can live an exciting life. You don't have necessarily that big adrenaline kind of rush from having an affair and the excitement from that, but actually you can live an exciting life that is continually exciting and changing. But you've got to really strive for it. It doesn't just happen. You've got to work through it.
See, I want a quiet life. I have such a stressful life. So much going on as a working mum as well. All I want is just peace and quiet. I've got time to go to nightclubs and a younger man or anything like that.
No, absolutely.
I really just want a rest.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of people...
I have been ill for 2 years and incapacitated, and I can't wait to get better and live a different life.
Yeah.
I do.
That makes sense.
I want to travel more. I want to be more irresponsible. I want to stop getting up at 3 o'clock in the morning.
You are the enfant terrible, as you said to me this morning. You are. I'm worried about you. I'm going to watch with amusement.
But everybody's idea of fun is different, isn't it?
Yeah.
And a lot of people feel like they want to run away, but it's about creating a life where you don't have to run away from it. You can find peace if that is, you know, if that is what you value.
The running away bit I can relate to, but it's not that, like, you know... the form it would take.
No, absolutely.
Very, very
bit
interesting.
Depressing, but
so you've got a book out on this. What do you think this book will teach people?
Because I see a lot of people in personal therapy, I've been meaning to write this book for about 4 or 5 years now. So I just wanted people to get an idea of what happens on individual therapy. So that's why I wrote the book. So it just takes you a step-by-step guide of how to change your life in accordance with the life that you want to live now that you're in your 40s, 50s, 60s.
Julie, I'm guessing you're in that range.
I am. I am. Especially this time of the morning, Eamonn, yeah.
Is there anything you want to tell us? You know, have you
had one?
Have you had one? Yeah.
Well, I got married last week.
Oh, is this your husband?
It is my husband. Yeah.
Well, it's your husband, or you've got a stalker. Very good to see you.
Hello.
Yeah. So that was new. So
That's good.
Yeah.
Excuse me, could I ask you, was that a deliberate decision, as in you'd reached a certain age and you thought...
Excuse me, could I ask you?
And you're going to do something about it. You're going to spice up your life. You're going to...
Well, that was more about meeting a wonderful person at a great time in my life and asking him to marry me.
Oh, wow, you did popping the question.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, I wasn't going to let him get away.
Ah, that's so nice.
That's a lovely love story. I'm glad you're living the dream. I think that's really nice. I think that's the thing. Whether you go through what is termed a crisis or not termed a crisis, it's just an experience for people. we should all hope that people are having a happy life and enjoying themselves. That's the main thing.
Can I ask you, since we've got you here, and we were going to talk about love languages earlier, and I thought it was really interesting. YouGov did a survey of men and women and what so there's
this is very interesting.
It's the idea of the 5 things that within a relationship people basically is the way you speak to them through love. So you can either have quality time, words of affirmation, which is praise or appreciation, physical touch, which I have to stress doesn't necessarily mean sex, but I suspect for men it generally does. Acts of service, so emptying the dishwasher, taking the bins out, or helping put the kids to bed. And gifts. The most shocking thing to me was that only 2% of people thought gifts was the most important thing. But the biggest distinction between men and women was actually on physical touch. 21% of men said physical touch was their love language, 7% of women.
Yeah.
Well, that's fascinating.
Yeah, it is. I mean, what age were the people
I don't
that were
know.
surveyed?
I think it was just 3,743 people.
OK. The thing is, I think I certainly deal with people who've been in long-term relationships, and I think the language of love can change through that time as well. So when people are together 30, 40 years, people change, people grow apart and express themselves in different ways, but it's all about communication and asking your partner and telling them what you're looking for.
Why don't they teach love languages on marriage courses? We had to, because we were married in a church, we had to go and do a day talking about passing the pen when we were arguing and all this nonsense. Why didn't they say this? Because my husband could have, basically, is it also possible that I could want all 5 of those constantly?
Why not? Absolutely, I insist upon it.
Yeah, me too. OK, well, that's sorted.
Well, that's very interesting. It's got people thinking, talking about your life. If you're not going through a midlife crisis, why not? Why not? Sounds like
Absolutely.
A good idea.
I think you need her book.
Dr. Julie Hannon's book is The Midlife Crisis Handbook. And I see you've got your number here. I think I'm making an appointment to come and see you.
You'd be very welcome.
You see, it's a real thing. It's a real thing, but it can be a very positive thing in your life. I don't think people should be derided for going through change in their life instead of stuck doing the same things, thinking the same ways, being the same.
Well, you used to say, like
person.
cars, people should change partners every 7 years.
Every 7 years. Like, I mean, preferably, I get a new car about every 3 years.
Are you prepared to trade up in 3 years' time?
He's not going anywhere.
Exactly, that's the thing. I think if it's true love,
because I think people grow together, and I think it's all about communication. People change, and so it is about how we're going to move forward and grow together. Definitely,
Definitely. You're a very interesting person.
Yeah, we've been told we have to move on. We've talked much longer than we're supposed to, but we couldn't stop ourselves. Dr. Julie Hannon, in case anyone at home needs to make a call as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Got the newspapers right after this. Don't go away.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
Right, coming up to 22 minutes before 8 o'clock. Very nice to have you on board. Let's bring you up to date with the front pages of the papers on this Tuesday morning.
Here's the Times. It's leading with the Prime Minister's submarine deal as he warns of a difficult and dangerous decade ahead.
Telegraph focuses on Jeremy Hunt's boost for pensioners ahead of the budget tomorrow.
At the Mail says Gary Lineker's Match of the Day return is a slap in the face for BBC licence fee payers.
And The Sun says convicted paedophile and former pop star Gary Glitter back in jail after breaking his bail conditions. And that's where we're going to start today as we go through the papers with Louisa Zisman and Norman Baker. Very nice to see you both. Norman, what do you think about Gary Glitter?
It's Louisa's story, that one.
What do I think about Gary Glitter? Well, I mean, Gary Glitter is, has committed an offence. He's been in prison and he's been rather stupid by seeking to access the dark web while he's in this kind of halfway house.
Rather stupid or totally sick and incurable?
Well, both those things. I mean, he's 78, so he ought to know better, but I guess it's ingrained behaviour which you can't change.
You think he did it on purpose, Lisa?
I do. I think he's 78 and he thought, just get me back in there. They didn't like him in that halfway house. They all cheered when he left. I honestly think that he just thought, oh, what's the point in getting out now? Put me back in, I've got nothing. Because why would you be so stupid? Clearly you're being monitored.
Well, because he was hungry for something, you know, looking for trouble. I don't know.
It just makes
He was sending other convicts out for his food and for his shopping. He never went out of this halfway house. Rather peculiar behaviour.
Well, I think he knows he'd be mobbed, obviously, if he went out. It's one of the worst crimes, isn't it? Interestingly, he only served half of a 16-year sentence. What's the point in giving people 16-year sentences when people are only serving half their sentences? That never makes any sense to me. Clearly, he isn't rehabilitated. So why let him out?
Yeah. Would he ever be rehabilitated?
I don't think so. I think when you, like paedophilia, it's a
disease.
It's a disease. Well, it's also a preference. You can't cure that. That's what they want. I don't think you can ever rehabilitate something like that.
OK.
I really don't.
Jeremy Hunt preparing to boost tax-free allowance for pensions. We were trying to work out what that means and who that benefits. This is front page of the Telegraph, Norman.
Yes, and let's be quite clear, this is a boost for rich pensioners, not for all pensioners. If you're a normal pensioner living in a semi-detached house in Bolton, you're no better off as a consequence of this. This is about people who have got the ability to increase their annual allowance from 40,000 to 60,000, so a rarefied group of people, doctors perhaps, people like that. And the objective, apparently, from Jeremy Hunt, and by the way, we're learning about the budget way in ahead of the budget. This is a new tactic these days, isn't it, to tell us what's in the budget.
It's less than we normally get, probably thanks to Gary Glitter. Gary Lineker. Don't want to muddle those two up. Sorry, Gary Lineker.
Yes, they are totally different. Yeah, but I mean, that's a digression that we shouldn't learn about the budget before it was actually announced. That used to be an offence. But the point is here that this is trying to apparently get people back into work who have retired early. Perhaps because of COVID, they decided, oh, we'll chuck it in now and not come back to work. Well, it may be an objective which is worth supporting, but this is for a rarefied group of people. There's nothing for most pensioners. And actually, the people I worry about, and I'm speaking as someone who'd be a pensioner very shortly, is young people who get nothing really from this government and are facing a position where they're going to inherit less than any other previous generation. They're going to be poorer than their parents.
You did mention doctors, though, and there's a huge problem for the NHS that once junior doctors qualify to become consultants, a huge exodus of them leave because of this pension kind of penalty that abolished under George Osborne. And the idea is that this would help to keep many of those consultants within the NHS rather than going private or to work in laboratories or whatever it might be. So that's a positive. Surely give them some credit for that.
That is a positive, but I think there's a way of actually helping that particular group of people, which is a narrow group of people, rather than spreading it out as widely as this. We haven't got very much money in the public finances at the moment, and is this the best use of the money? I don't think it is.
Norman, you said you're soon to become a pensioner. I've lost count as to what the age is when you're officially regarded as a pensioner.
Well, I'm 66 this year, so I got my bus pass this year.
Oh, you don't get it to
65.
It was 65, yeah.
So when are you officially
is it 66?
It's 66 now, and it's going up to 67 in due course.
And do you get discounts at the theatre yet, or does that kick in later?
No, but I get cheap fish and chips in Seaford at the fish and chip shop.
Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That would be...
And you get money off bowling in Brighton. So there are certain places when you get to 60...
You are living it up, Norman.
Living it up,
the dream, Norman.
Fish and chips and bowling, I mean, honestly, I tell you.
That's very relatable. There'll be loads of pensioners who do the same.
Yeah.
Louisa, what about Gary Lineker then? I accidentally brought him in already, but the Express leading with the headline, has Lineker put a nail in the coffin of the licence fee? And this is because there's a bunch of Tory MPs now, including Jacob Rees-Mogg yesterday on the channel, saying it's time to get rid of the taxpayers-funded state broadcasting system.
I'm thrilled that the BBC has backed down against this kind of cancel culture. I think there's two things. A, I don't think that the BBC can keep up with the licence fee. There's just too much competition now. And I also don't believe that any of the news that we see on TV is impartial. I just don't buy into that. So I think, yeah, it's time to get rid of it, to be honest with you.
To get rid of the BBC?
Well, no, get rid of the licence.
Oh, right, sorry, right.
But, and I'm so happy that they've reinstated him and that he stood up against the cancel culture that we all seem to be wrapped up in these days. I think good for him. And on the flip side, you know, there is this BBC contract which does have a lot of grey areas in it. I mean, I personally wouldn't sign that contract, but in one way, he did sign a contract and he should abide by that contract. But also, he didn't actually say anything bad in criticism of the government.
Well, it was the reference to Germany in the 30s, which was obviously under Nazi rule, and obviously that's hugely offensive to a lot of Jewish people who believed it trivialised.
Well, he talked about the language. He didn't talk about the Nazi regime, and this is why it's been extrapolated. But, you know, the issue is here that Jeremy Hunt was right yesterday, the Chancellor, who said the BBC needs to be independent and impartial. That's absolutely right. It's not independent and impartial. And contrary to what the Daily Mail and Daily Express will say, the BBC is actually favourable to the Conservative government, not to the left. You've got the chairman who was a Tory donor and helped Boris Johnson with an £800,000 loan. You've got the Director General who stood for the Tories in the local elections back when. We've got Robbie Gibb, who was a Tory advisor to Theresa May on the board of the BBC. And the inconsistency has been apparent. Here's Gary Lineker being pulled off the air for his comments, which I don't think actually merited being pulled off the air for. But Alan Sugar actually had, before the 2019 election, in the run-up to the election, he called for people to vote for Boris Johnson overtly, and he likened Jeremy Corbyn. He had him sitting next to Adolf Hitler in a car at the Nuremberg rally.
Yeah.
I mean, what was that about that? Nothing.
Yeah, hugely inconsistent, as you say. We're going to have a shortened papers because we do have
we're not
Tom
going to have a
Tugendhat's
shortened
anyway.
papers,
Well, we'll come back.
We'll come back. But the Prime Minister's vowed to stand shoulder to shoulder against aggression from China. Yesterday, the whole big thing was he announced a new deal to build nuclear submarines in Britain. Joining us now, Security Minister. We say good morning to Tom Tugendhat. Mr. Tugendhat, hello there.
Good morning, Eamonn. How are you?
Well, I'm fine. I'm fine. We're talking about a number of subjects today, but the big subject to talk about is this alliance between America and Australia. And what do you think about what you've heard yesterday about this deal to build submarines?
Look, I think this is a hugely important deal for the British people and actually for many of our allies around the world, including some who aren't part of this arrangement. And the reason I say that is because this is going to create a single nuclear boat fleet that will enable us to operate in 3 oceans and with partners around the world. Look, this partnership between Australia, the United States and the United Kingdom is enormously important for our whole country, but particularly for people in Barrow-in-Furness, where our submarines are built, and for all of their suppliers from places like Derby, where the Rolls-Royce engines are made. This is a fantastic deal for the United Kingdom. It's also hugely important for Australia, allowing them a nuclear-capable fleet, and it's really important for the United States, giving them a reach into various areas of the Indian Ocean and into the South Pacific that has been really important to them holding the line and protecting the international rules-based order, as it's called, which is basically that agreement between free countries to travel and trade freely.
Tom, during the leadership contest to become Prime Minister last year, you talked about China, and as did Rishi Sunak. There's been a softening of the language, hasn't there? It feels a little bit as though the Prime Minister is tiptoeing around it, calling China a challenge. But why not just call a spade a spade? They're a threat to us.
Well, look, Isabel, you raise an important point, which is China does raise many challenges, and some of those are threats and some of those are challenges. And the reality is dealing with China is going to require a whole-of-government approach. And that's why the integrated review that was published yesterday is so important. Because it doesn't just talk about the military element, and there I can, if you like, I can point to the £5 billion increase in the defence budget and the aspiration for 2.5%. I can point to the doubling of money to deal with the challenge of China, which is going to include things like language learning and making sure that officials and senior officers and so on are much more aware of what China is up to. But I can also point to any number of different areas, like the way in which the Defending Democracy Task Force that I'm lucky enough to chair has set up different ways to approach the challenge of police stations, secret police stations by the Chinese state, or indeed repression by the Chinese state of Chinese citizens here in the UK. So this is a whole-of-government approach, and the Aukus element, the defence element that the Prime Minister was in San Diego signing, is only one aspect of it, and there's much more about this to come. So this is a whole-of-government approach. It involves education, it involves the police, it involves so many different aspects of our intelligence services that this is a huge, I'm afraid, challenge. It's true, because there are some areas where we've got to engage. We've got to engage with our eyes wide open, and this is something I've always said. We mustn't be naive. There were certainly some people who may have been in recent decades, but we can't be naive, but we do have to engage.
What about the money involved, Mr. Tugendhat? Prime Minister saying £5 billion, but that's not going to come immediately. How long will that, what duration would that be spread over, for instance?
Well, the £5 billion is going to come pretty soon, actually. It's the aspiration to 2.5% is before 2030, and the reality is that's a floor, not a ceiling. So, what we're doing is we're facing the reality that the world has changed. You don't need me to tell you, Eamonn, that in the last 12 months, well, just over 12 months, we've seen a change in Europe with Putin's aggression in Ukraine. We've seen increasing challenges to our NATO allies in the East, and we've seen, I'm afraid, the reality that essential partners like Australia and New Zealand are facing pressures that they simply haven't faced in years before. So this is a really very welcome increase in defence spending, but this isn't just about defence. The reality is this integrated review takes state threats against us here in the United Kingdom seriously. And you heard me only a few weeks ago talking about Iranian state threats here, and you've heard me, I'm afraid, sadly, having to talk about Russian state threats here in the United Kingdom. And so this is an integrated review that recognises not just defence, but the reality that our intelligence agencies, our police force, and indeed many others of our public services are on the front line today, even here at home.
You say it's a welcome amount of money. The MOD actually wanted 11 billion, didn't they? And with the cost of these submarines, 1.3 billion a piece, and the cost of trying to fund troops and whatever's happening on the ground with Ukraine, it actually means a real terms cut in defence, does it not?
No, I don't accept that, actually. No, and as a former army officer, you're never going to hear me arguing for less money for defence. That's certainly not a position I'm going to hold. But the reality is this deal is fantastically important for our defence capability as well, because, of course, making more boats, making boats for the Australian Navy, for the Royal Australian Navy, and making sure that we have boats that are entirely compatible with our US allies will reduce the cost of each boat for everyone. And that's really important. It's not just important because it's more jobs in Barrow, it's more jobs in the UK for various different suppliers, but it's cheaper boats for the Royal Navy and therefore more capability. That is hugely important, and that's why the Royal Navy supports this, and that's why everybody in Defence supports this, because what we really want to see is we want to see a much greater capability for the British Armed Forces, and that means working with allies and partners. And that's why I certainly welcome this Aukus deal, this deal between President Biden, Prime Minister Albanese and Prime Minister Sunak that was signed only a few hours ago in San Diego.
OK, Tom, but if you're the Chinese hearing this news, or you're the Russians hearing this news, how does that make them think?
Well, I can't speak for the government in Beijing. I'm afraid I'm not a communist. But the reality is that the Communist Party in China has recognized for a long time that the alliance of democracies that we have seen around the world is its greatest challenge. And that's why they're seeking to undermine us in various different ways. But it's also why standing together with allies is the best way of resisting that pressure. Now, if you look at
That is, are they quaking in their boots? Are they quaking in the boots about this? I mean, there's always that distinction. We call them nuclear submarines. They're nuclear-powered submarines. They don't have nuclear weapons, as I understand, on board. So this announcement, would this curtail any ambition that the Chinese would have in that part of the world or the Russians would have in that part of the world?
Eamonn, let's not undermine what these are. These are some of the most extraordinary attack boats the world has ever seen. These so-called hunter-killer class submarines are able to deploy hundreds and hundreds of miles subsurface and to reach many, many miles from their home bases. In fact, some of them can stay subsurface for months at a time. That gives an extraordinary capability to the Royal Australian Navy, the Royal Navy and the United States Navy to be able to deploy force and to defend our allies pretty much anywhere in the world, in the Indian Ocean, the Pacific Ocean, and of course in the Atlantic, should it ever be necessary. This is a fantastic capability, and having three navies working so closely together is a remarkable alliance and demonstrates a level of cooperation and trust in each other, not just for today, but for generations to come.
OK, Tom, I want to ask you about the immigration bill. Passed through its first reading in the Commons last night. The Home Secretary calling detractors of her bill lefties. But it's not just lefties, is it? 3 Conservatives, fairly senior, 2 former Cabinet members and a former Prime Minister didn't actually vote because of their concerns about the government openly admitting that the bill could well contravene human rights laws, international commitments.
Look, I think we've seen in recent years one of the most horrific trades in human beings that we've experienced for hundreds of years. It's absolutely vile to see what is done to some of the most innocent and vulnerable people in the world. And it's quite right that we focus on what's happening on our own shores, but you don't have to look very far to see that this crime is much worse. If you look at what's happening in the Sahara, even right now, and the number of people who are being murdered by human traffickers, effectively abandoned in the desert and left to die. It's absolutely horrific. If you see the number of people who are trafficked in vile ways into countries on the North African coast, or indeed, you don't need me to remind you of that horrific scene of Lineker, the young boy who washed up on the shores of Turkey. This is one of the most vile trades in human beings that the world has seen, and it's absolutely right that we do everything we can to stop it.
Tom Tugendhat, very good to hear from you. Thank you. Tom Tugendhat is the Minister of State for Security. We wish you fond farewell. Thank you very much indeed. Norman Baker reviewing our papers here today, front page of the Times on this very story.
Well, indeed, and I think the Prime Minister's secured a bit of a coup, to be perfectly frank with you, for this deal, because you can see why the Australians are interested in this, and it's a major part of their defence system. You can see why the US is interested, because they're a world player. But we've got ourselves on an equal basis with these two countries for somewhere a long way away from us. So this is a good achievement for Rishi Sunak, and also will be good for jobs in this country. I think Tom Tugendhat's on weaker ground when he talks about the integrated review, because the fact of the matter is that China objectively wishes to destroy democracies. It has a long-term aim of replacing the form of government across the world with one more akin to itself. That's what it wants to do. It's as radical as that. So China is absolutely a threat to this country, absolutely a threat, not just a challenge.
And do you think they're quaking in their boots listening to this deal?
No, I think they'll be angry. They've already said they're angry because they say it's a Cold War move and everything else. They're angry because it's the West being effective, democracies working together to try and shut down or to control this move towards undemocratic government from Russia and China. It's a good move.
OK, thank you very much indeed. Norman Baker and Louisa Zisman, they're going to be back in about 40 minutes' time with more stories from the papers. For the moment, guys, thank you very much
Thank you. We'll be back in a moment. We'll be talking more about Rishi Sunak and that big coup, as Norman was describing it, the Aukus Pact that was unveiled in the States last night. But first, here's your forecast with Luke Marl.
Good morning and welcome to your weather forecast with Luke Mile. It's a bright and sunny start to the day for most of the UK, a much brighter day on offer, but it will be feeling colder with some wintry showers. And that's because our air is coming down from the north, coming from the Arctic, so a much colder direction than what we saw on Monday. Now, the cold front that we had yesterday has cleared away, but we are still seeing the risk of some showers around those northern, western and eastern exposed coasts that come inland. And you'll see plenty of fine and sunny weather around. Where we've got the snow showers, though, we do have a snow and ice warning in force. That stays out through the rest of the day. Gradually through the afternoon, we will see the skies clouding over for northern England and parts of Wales, where we could see the risk of some hill snow, accompanied by some fairly gusty winds and rain down to lower levels. But a colder day for all of us, temperatures in single figures for most, feeling colder than that when you factor in the strength of that breeze. Through Tuesday evening then, that rain, sleet and snow pushes its way smartly southwards. As skies clear behind then and winds ease down, it's going to be a cold night. You can see the blue exploding on the map there, suggesting quite a widespread frost as we start the day on Wednesday. Still with the risk of some snow showers affecting northern parts of Scotland. Temperatures in the countryside, though, sub-zero on Wednesday morning. You'll definitely need those ice scrapers out there. Do be careful for slippery surfaces as well. But as the day progresses, the best of the sunshine stays across eastern areas, because out to the west, you can see the next batch of rain pushing its way in, preceded by some hill snow, perhaps for Northern Ireland and North Wales. But I think for most of us, it will turn quite wet by the time we get to the second part of Wednesday. Still hanging on to the colder air across the east, but milder air starts pushing its way in from the west. And that's the theme as we head into the outlook. Temperatures starting to rise through Thursday and Friday, but staying fairly unsettled as well. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prisons?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel. Britain's news channel.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by two of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The size of the UK's nuclear submarine fleet could double under a new defence deal with America and Australia.
Hello there, very good to have you on board. The time is 7 o'clock. It's Tuesday the 14th of March and you're tuned in to Breakfast on GB News with Eamonn and Isabel.
Here's what's leading the news this morning. The Prime Minister has vowed to keep the oceans free as he announces a major deal with the United States and Australia to build a new fleet of nuclear-powered submarines. Security Minister Tom Tugendhat says the agreement was an important step forward.
This is going to create a single nuclear boat fleet that will enable us to operate in 3 oceans and with partners around the world. Look, this partnership between Australia, the United States and the United Kingdom is enormously important.
The Chancellor will move to stop people from retiring early by boosting the tax-free allowance for pensions to a record level. It'll be included in his budget tomorrow and could see the allowance raised by £500,000.
The chairman of the BBC is under pressure to resign following a climb down in its standoff with Gary Lineker. Yesterday, the corporation's Director General announced a review of its social media guidelines and apologised for grey areas.
A man has died following a gas blast that destroyed a house in Swansea. 3 others have been taken to hospital following the explosion, which shook houses miles away.
And the paedophile former pop star Gary Glitter has been recalled to prison for breaching his bail conditions. An investigation found Glitter bragging about accessing the so-called dark web a month after his release from jail.
Let us know your views. Get in touch, gbviews@gbnews.uk, and let us know where you're watching or listening. Nice to have you there.
So it's our top story this morning. The Prime Minister has vowed to stand shoulder to shoulder against aggression from China as he announced a new deal to build nuclear submarines in the UK.
The agreement, unveiled alongside President Joe Biden and Australian PM Anthony Albanese, could see the size of the country's nuclear fleet double.
Well, speaking to our political editor Darren McCaffrey, the Prime Minister said he's doing what's necessary to keep the country safe.
Our approach is completely aligned with that of our closest allies. America, Australia, Japan, Canada, all of us are on the same page in how we think about China, how we're approaching it. And I'd say to everyone, know that you're our allies as a country, are all working together, we share the same view and we'll act together.
Well, we've just had the Security Minister, Tom Tugendhat, telling us the government is doing what it can to respond to these challenges from China.
The reality is dealing with China is going to require a whole-of-government approach. And that's why the integrated review that was published yesterday is so important. Because it doesn't just talk about the military element, and there I can, if you like, I can point to the £5 billion increase in the defence budget and the aspiration for 2.5%. I can point to the doubling of money to deal with the challenge of China, which is going to include things like language learning and making sure that officials and senior officers and so on are much more aware of what China is up to. But I can also point to any number of different areas, like the way in which the Defending Democracy Task Force that I'm lucky enough to chair has set up different ways to approach the challenge of police stations, secret police stations by the Chinese state, or indeed repression by the Chinese state of Chinese citizens here in the UK. So this is a whole-of-government approach, and the Aukus element, the defence element that the Prime Minister was in San Diego signing, is only one aspect of it, and there's much more about this to come. So this is a whole-of-government approach. It involves education, it involves the police, it involves so many different aspects of our intelligence services.
Well, let's now speak to former NATO commander Rear Admiral Chris Parry on this one. Good morning.
Good morning, Eamonn.
Well, what do you make of what we've heard from yesterday?
Well, it's really the conclusion of a deal that, of course, came to the forefront last year when they proposed in America and Australia that we would have a deal over these nuclear submarines. What we shouldn't forget is there is a lot more technology and defence agreement behind this. And essentially what it's saying is, look, we've got a threat from the major autocracies of the world, Russia, China, and Iran, and North Korea sort of every now and then. And we've actually got to do something about it. These countries are aggressively pushing their diplomacy and their armed forces out into the world. They're threatening the international system and also our system of values as well. And if we don't do something soon, then they're going to overwhelm us.
And yet, there's a little bit of tiptoeing around, walking on eggshells in terms of some of the language. You might call that diplomacy, but it's certainly a climb down on where the Prime Minister and indeed Tom Tugendhat, who we were just hearing from, were previously, now just calling China a challenge, when quite clearly they're much more than that.
Isabel, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of very diplomatic language in the latest refresh of the integrated review, but the message is quite clear. Everybody sees China as an existential threat to our society and values. And I think if you look at the refresh of the integrated review, you'll see that every aspect of our society has to be geared against the threat, not just from Russia, which is the one that is closest to us, but also China and these other autocracies as well. In many ways, we're playing catch up. I think people like me have been warning for some 10, 15 years that the threat from China and Russia is coming. And I think the government's got it at last and has put in place the principles, I should stress the principles behind how we're going to combat this threat. I think the practicalities have still got to be worked out.
That threat better not materialise in an exaggerated way over the next 15 years or so, Rear Admiral, because that's how long it's going to take to get these submarines operational. What about the machines that we're talking about, the boats that we're talking about? It's a bit like having easy payments, isn't it, across the board for a number of years and getting them. I can understand the economics of it, but are they actually up to the job, and will they continue to be up to the job? Nuclear powered, but not nuclear armed.
Well, we've got to understand what these boats are for. And you're quite right to call them boats, because submarines are boats. And they are basically floating chunks of sovereignty that are able to go around the world in essentially a stealth environment, because it's underwater. They're able to deploy weapons, but also a lot of sensors as well. So they'll be listening and trying to detect things. And if you look at the vast distances that are involved in the Indo-Pacific in particular, nuclear submarines are incredibly good at patrolling and also defending those areas. Now, as you said, they're not going to come in until 2040. They're designed to replace our current family of nuclear submarines, the Astute class. But be in no doubt, our 7 Astute class are world-leading nuclear submarines, well capable of taking on the challenge of Russia. They'll be complemented by the American nuclear submarines. They're the Hunter-Killer class. And while they're out there, they'll be defending our interests. In the meantime, we'll be bringing the Australians on board, developing infrastructure, training, and having mixed crews, so the Australians will be ready to take over with their own submarines when they come on stream in 2040. And what it is, it's a statement of intent. We're not just investing for what's happening now, we're investing for the future as well. We shouldn't forget, 2040 is not that far away.
Good to hear, Rear Admiral. Thank you very much indeed for your analysis. We'll leave it there. Thank you.
Now, the government's illegal migration bill has cleared its first hurdle after it passed its second reading in the Commons, despite concerns from some Conservative MPs.
We're also joined by the editor of Spiked, that's Tom Slater, in the studio this morning. Tom, busy morning. The migration bill, how's it going to sail?
Well, it seems like it's gone through a pretty healthy set of votes. This wasn't necessarily in question, I don't think. I think there's actually a lot of, within Conservative ranks, sense that something has to be done about this. Obviously, there were some rebels there, most significantly Theresa May, who didn't actually vote on this, but generally speaking, it's something they're relatively united on. I think what we'll have to see is what happens in the House of Lords. That's going to be somewhere where there could be significant challenges to it. But I think that the way that the debate has been set out at the moment, and which is why I think you're still seeing quite strong public support behind this particular bill, despite its shortcomings and quite a liberal measures in many respects, is because of the fact that the debate has become polarised between a government who wants to deal with what is a very genuine issue, but in a very, I would say, ham-fisted and quite a liberal fashion. And then you've got an opposition, not just in the Labour Party, but in the kind of great and good in general, who just want to pretend there isn't a problem at all and who want to compare it to Nazi Germany. And therefore, in that situation, I know where the kind of the public are going to start to see the government's measures as a lot more reasonable than I think maybe they otherwise should.
Although it's interesting you say that that's Labour's view, they want to pretend it's not happening. I mean, their criticisms of the bill, apart from the small matter of the human rights potential contraventions, has been actually just the way of how to tackle the small boats. It hasn't been saying we don't want to stop the small boats, which I think in itself is interesting. They've said they want to invest money into the National Crime Agency to try and target the people smugglers. But that's an admission in itself, isn't it, that this is a huge problem that the left also will have to deal with if they're in government next year.
That is true. I think they're trying to look both ways on this issue, though. They don't want to upset either voters in the country who are very understandably concerned about this particular problem, nor do they want to upset other people within their ranks, not necessarily just on the left of the party, but in the kind of liberal left of the party, tend to be the sort of people who see any attempt to grasp the nettle of this problem as unconscionable as something which is going to rip up our international obligations and so on. So I think there's a chance that the Labour Party could fall between two stools on this particular issue, at least where the public's concerned.
The Prime Minister was complaining that the Gary Lineker furore had kind of distracted from his, landmark plans on migration. But you'd also say the same about the budget. It's not been in the headlines as much as you would expect. Lots of previews. Big day tomorrow for the Chancellor. Funny email in from Leon in Northampton this morning saying Chairman Hunt will be steady as we go because he'll be saving all the fireworks for the pre-election budget. He's spot on, isn't he?
Well, yes, I mean, that's really been the sort of platform that both Jeremy Hunt set out before Rishi Sunak came in, but also as he was kept on as Chancellor, which is very much steady as she goes, which is very much about we have to set ourselves within very tight limits because we all knew what happened under the Liz Truss government and so on. And that kind of sense about if you're too bold, then things can go awry very quickly. And I think that's one of the regrettable things about the many mistakes that Liz Truss made, is it has kind of created a mood which is to do anything quite bold is seen as incredibly risky. Whereas obviously, given the hole that we're in so many respects in our economy and our energy policy, all different things, bold action is needed, just not bold action so terribly mishandled as it was in that case.
What about this move on pensions in a bid to try and get the over 50s back to work, so-called doctor's tax? Will that work?
Well, there's actually a lot of discussion about whether or not it could incentivise some people to continue to work. As you say, it was referred to as the doctor's tax because of the fact that people, as they were getting up to that, I think it's just over £1 million threshold in terms of their tax-free pension pots, it would lead them to kind of reduce their hours or to potentially retire early. There's been some critics who have pointed out that in certain other areas it could actually have the reverse incentive by raising this threshold. So it just shows you how complex this whole situation is. And whilst the government can come out and say, we want people to be in work longer, we want to do this, we want to do that, given the complexity of the system, it's not always as straightforward as all that.
OK. Tom, thank you very much
Thank you.
indeed.
12 minutes past 7 o'clock. A man has died following a gas blast that destroyed a house in Swansea. 3 others were taken to hospital following the explosion, which shook houses miles away. Now, South Wales Police have started an investigation to establish the cause. Our reporter Will Hollis is in Swansea. Good morning, Will.
Well, you can see here on Cliddock Road that there is still quite a large police presence, Eamonn. And Isabel, there's also a cordon round on the other side, and as you can see, just in the background behind me, you can see a group of police officers, but you can also see quite a huge pile of rubble in the road, and that is essentially what is left from the remains of one person and parts of other houses here on Cliddock Road, the remains of one person's home and essentially one person's life, because yesterday police announced that the person that they had been looking for in relation to this gas explosion here in Swansea had been found and had been confirmed to have died. His family has also been made aware of what's happened. 3 people were also taken to hospital. I'm told that this morning one of those people is thought to be remaining in hospital. 2 of those people have also been sent home. It really is quite hard to imagine just the scene of the devastation here in South Wales, because it is a residential area. It is an area that is very close to the biggest road in and out of South Wales, and it reminds you of something that you would expect to see in the most horrific environments around war, because there is essentially a massive hole in what is this quite close-knit community, a community that has been spending the night at various different welfare centres. I spoke to one person this morning who said that he has come home and he has been allowed to remain on the street because his father is ill and he needs to be close to various different forms of medication. But lots of people have chosen to stay away. Police are reiterating that this is very much an ongoing incident, and they say that their thoughts are with the family of the person that has died and everybody that has been affected. Wales and West Utilities, who manages the gasworks here, are still trying to determine what exactly happened here. And
Thank you very much indeed. An eerie silence there and a very sad situation. But you've got to ask, how many gas explosions have there been in the past year and fatalities associated with them? How safe is gas and the infrastructure.
Yeah,
that supplies it to
absolutely
your
on the rise,
houses.
100%. I don't remember there being this many 10 years ago, for example, and I was discussing with one of the producers this morning, if you combined all the victims from all of these various explosions, then you'd have a pretty powerful case for the government to answer to, almost like a sort of Grenfell when it comes to these gas explosions. But at the moment, not an awful lot seems to be being done about it.
Well, I had a gas situation recently. Our gas was turned off where a boiler had been dripping, leaking water onto pipes, and the gas pipe eroded, and there was this gas leak, which I knew nothing about. But luckily, somebody smelt it, and our gas had to be turned off as a result for a day or so.
Yeah, that's why it's so important to get the annual checks of your boiler, isn't it? Because I'm not saying you didn't, but you can sometimes have these faults with your boiler, and obviously
you'd know nothing about
you'd
them.
know nothing about it.
16 minutes past 7 o'clock. Let's bring you up to date with what else is happening news-wise.
Tens of thousands of appointments and operations are expected to be cancelled as junior doctors enter a second day of walkouts. The British Medical Association says junior doctors in England have suffered a 26% real terms cut to their pay. Last week, the Health Secretary invited the BMA to talks, but the union rejected the idea.
National Police Chiefs Council data shows more than 1,000 complaints were made against staff's conduct in a 6-month period. When it came to treatment of women and girls, complaints relate to various allegations against police in England and Wales between October 21 and March 22, and that included sexual harassment.
Dick Fosbury, who revolutionised the high jump in athletics, has died at the age of 76. His agent said he passed away peacefully in his sleep on Sunday morning following a battle with lymphoma. Fosbury used his new technique to win the gold medal at the 1968 Olympic Games in Mexico City. I did high jump at school.
Yeah.
I could
Did you
never
do the Fosbury flop?
The Fosbury flop. No, I actually couldn't, but I was lucky because at school I grew taller faster than all the others. So I was doing the scissors, which was the traditional way until the Fosbury flop was introduced. But it's hard to think of anyone who actually changed their field as much as he did.
Yeah. I was 8 at the time when those Olympics happened in Mexico, and I remember he was the big phenomenon, big sensation of the Games that year. And it changed then when you went to school and you were taught a whole different way of undergoing this jump. I mean, terrible discipline anyway. I mean, you have to spread your legs.
This funny kind of run where you kind of like leap
Bounce.
and then boing over the back.
Yeah.
But I used to love high jump. It was great.
I couldn't do it, you see, because my hips were always limited and I couldn't spread my legs very well. So I could go like that, shuffle, but I couldn't.
You were always like that.
Get my leg over the bar.
I had no problems getting my leg over the bar.
Well,
yes, anyway, that's our reflections on athletics.
Well, it is, yes.
It's a historic moment.
If you have childhood memories of your Fosbury flopping, let us know about that. But it really was an amazing thing. I remember I had a sticker book and everything, and you collected all the people from David Hammery, all the people from that particular year of the Mexico Olympics.
Indeed, right.
Anyway, 90 minutes actually past 7.
We're going to talk about Gary Glitter now. The paedophile pop star has been recalled to jail after breaching his licensing conditions.
He's 78 years of age and he had only been on release for 6 weeks. Paul Hawkins is outside the Ministry of Justice for us this morning. Paul, could you just explain to people what he did to be recalled, what he did to break his bail conditions?
Well, the Ministry of Justice haven't confirmed why he was recalled to jail, but there are reports in the media that he was seen using his phone and admitted trying to access the dark web on his phone. The dark web, for those who don't know, is kind of the subversive, hidden part of the internet where a lot of criminal activity takes place, accessible only with specialised anonymous search engines. So we don't have confirmation of exactly why he was, but that is what was being widely reported in the media. This is Gary Glitter, also known as Paul Gadd, 79-year-old Paul Gadd, big pop star of the 1970s, freed in February after serving half his 16-year jail term for sexually abusing 3 schoolgirls, 2 of them 12 and 13. He invited them backstage and then isolated them from his mother, and then in 1970 75, he attempted to rape a girl who was under the age of 10. Now, the allegations came to light when he was first investigated by the Metropolitan Police as part of Operation Newtree, following the Jimmy Savile scandal. And then in 2015, he was sentenced to jail for attempted rape, 4 counts of indecent assault, and 1 of having sex with a girl under the age of 13. He's now been recalled to HMP The Verne, a low security Category C prison in Dorset, and the parole board will now decide whether to release him while they investigate what he may or may not have been up to.
Well, thank you very much indeed with that horrible story this morning.
Well, we'll take a break there. Still to come, if you struggle with your child's maths homework, teacher Bobby Siegel will help you make sense of the numbers as we mark International Day of Mathematics.
Your favourite day of the year.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the People's Channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Dubes and Co.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Dubes and Co. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today.
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
25 past 7, a very good morning to you. Good to see you, including those of you watching this morning in the Heathrow Lounge.
Yes.
This is the inn.
Very fancy private lounge with us on it.
Yes.
Good morning.
Good morning. And we want this contagion to spread. be on all the lounges in all the airports in the UK.
Yeah, spread the word. Right, 7:25 still to come on the programme this morning. We've been talking a lot about it over the last few weeks and we're going to do a deep dive on this. This is the weight loss injection being used by celebrities. It could soon be available on the NHS, but we're asking, is the drug any substitute for good old-fashioned exercise and healthy food? Find out at 7:45.
And should you be eating squirrels to save the planet? 8:45. We're going to be talking to a chef who's a fan of squirrel meat. And we're going to be finding out what it tastes like exactly. Isabel has volunteered to eat.
Do you know, when you show a picture of a fluffy animal like that and then talk about eating it, something balks, but actually you never really want to see the animal when you're discussing what you're eating. But I'd give it a go. I'd give it a go, a squirrel.
Would you?
Yeah, why not?
Okay.
I can't be a hypocrite. I eat meat, so.
Would you give it a go? GB Views at gbnews.uk.
Right, if you are a regular viewer or listener of this programme, you will know that both Eamonn and I have a bit of a fear of mathematics. But today is International Day of Mathematics, and it's designed really to try and not only help people like us get over our fear, but the young as well.
I mean, the only reason you have to know about mathematics is to help your child at their homework, because you won't need it in your everyday life at all. At all.
Unless you want to be fleeced by people, employers, taxmen.
Yeah, I have been now.
Exactly.
Yeah, been now.
You know, you've got to be on. You've got to be on the ball
That's
with the
true.
numbers.
That's true. Anyway, here to help you out with anything you need to know is the author of The Life-Changing Magic of Numbers. He is friend of the show, Mr. Bobby Seagull, into the studio. And we should say to you, Bobby is here before he actually goes into class teaching maths today.
Yes.
And this man. Maths has changed your life, Bobby, because you used to have a city job.
Yes, I used to be an investment banker, a trader at Lehman Brothers.
Yeah.
Less said about that bank, the better. And then a chartered accountant at PwC. But I feel as if my calling is towards helping other people feel better towards mathematics.
Right, Bobby, we need you in our lives, and I need you with my children. And you know, so many parents like me want to be better at helping their kids. How can we if we're not naturally able with numbers?
So I think it's all about our experiences of maths. And we actually had a conversation just a couple of minutes before about your daughter, and she was doing some sort of addition in class and she had her head down.
Yeah, she's 5 years old, and I could just tell she wasn't following.
And I think
maybe sad.
And I think it can happen to all of us, but the key thing is, how do you respond to that adversity? If it becomes a cycle of misery where the next lesson she's not looking forward to it, and the next lesson she's putting her head down in her hands, and then by the time she's 10, 11, she's like, actually, Mum, maths is not my thing. It's all about trying to be more positive, giving them support early as possible, so therefore they think, actually, I could do maths, rather than thinking maths is not for them.
I suppose one of the spin-offs of this is that we are talking about it, this International Day of Maths. What do you think, designating a day like this, what good can it do?
I think it's raising awareness, because many people, when they finish maths at school at 16 or 18, they're trying to avoid the subject. Like, often on Fridays, if I meet people at the pub and I tell them I'm a maths teacher, you can guess the conversation where it heads. So having a day where it's trying to raise the positive nature of the subject and how we can support people, I think is always a good thing.
And we talked before about Rishi Sunak, who said that he wanted one of his ambitions to be to make maths mandatory to the age of 18. And he said that we are sending young people out into the world ill-equipped to cope with everything from paying their tax bills to finding the best mortgage to getting through life. I mean, there's a lot of sense in all of that.
No, there's not.
Yes, there is.
There isn't. There isn't. He'd be better off telling us how to fill in our tax forms than teaching us about maths. It's not part of it. It's the way maths is taught in the most boring ways. I mean, basically, when I went to school, arithmetic, I'm fine. You can ask me times tables and whatever I do. I worked as a barman. I can add things up in my head. All good. But then it comes to algorithms, and it comes to algebra, and it comes to all sorts of things that I think, well, I don't need to be a nuclear scientist. I don't want to design airplanes or whatever. So you then lose track. I got to 13, lost, and I never got back into it again.
But what I would say is, so you obviously are comfortable with your arithmetic and those number skills, but a lot of people in the UK aren't. I think 1 in 2 adults, according to this charity National Numeracy, have the numeracy skills we'd expect from an 11-year-old child. So clearly most people in the country really don't even have that basic number skills.
Okay.
Are we being tested? Are you going to be
Yes,
giving
you've
us
got
a
a
maths
couple of
test?
problems.
Well, have you got them on a
I've got them.
You're
here.
holding them.
I've got
Okay,
them
right,
here.
hit us up
So
then.
imagine you're going to do a little coffee round.
Okay.
One for each of you, £4.50 for each coffee.
Okay.
£4.50 for each coffee. So you're buying 2 coffees, yeah?
Yeah. £9.
But you're told that actually the coffee shop, because of inflation, they're going to increase their prices by 5%.
Oh, don't ask me that.
5%.
Okay.
What is the cost of your coffee?
I don't know how to do 5% off the top of my head. Go on, Eamonn.
It is.
I'm going to Google it.
£13.50.
Oh, so I think you got the right number. So 10% is
10% would be
90p.
Yeah.
And then half of that is
45.
Yeah, good. There you go. So it's
£9.45.
There we go. We got it.
I just would have paid too much.
That's the story of your life. OK, next one.
Oh, next one's a bit trickier. So this one was set to MPs in the UK. Half of them struggled. So it's a tricky one.
Gosh.
There's a bit of probability. So imagine we're playing a game.
Yeah.
And we've got a coin, a fair coin, and we're going to flip it twice.
Yeah.
What's the chance of getting 2 tails in a row? So I flip it once.
OK.
And I flip it again.
So,
I have no idea.
So think about the first time you throw it. What's the chance of getting a tail or a
50%.
Yeah, 50%.
Right, OK.
And then the chance of getting a tail on the second attempt is still going to be
50%.
50%.
So 2 versions of 50%.
So it's almost like a half times a half. Do you remember your fractions in school?
Yeah.
Half times a half is a quarter.
Oh, right, OK.
So it's 25% chance.
Out of 4 possible outcomes, one of those is 2 tails.
Perfect. That's exactly what we do that in school, actually.
But I feel stressed. Do you know what I mean? I feel my temperature rising, and I've got this fear that I'm going to get it wrong and displease you.
It happens to me as well. If I'm on a telly show, I was on Celebrity Pointers recently, and I made a maths mistake.
No.
And Richard, it made the edit because Richard Osman thought Bobby knows what he's talking about, and I got people tweeting me saying, "I thought this guy was a maths genius. He's an idiot." So I think that maths anxiety can impact all of us.
Yeah.
But I think it's OK to make mistakes, but the key thing is, can you just sit down with your working and go, does it make sense?
When you go into your classroom today, and you'll be able to look around and you'll see in one child's eyes, they have no idea what you're talking about. How do you reach to them? How do you deal with that?
I think one thing is, don't embarrass people publicly with maths. Because if you try and humiliate them, go, James, what's the answer? And you can see James has no idea. If you're going, James, 5 seconds, that's going to put him off. And he'll have that negative memory. So I think it's maybe talking to them separately. Once you know the group explanation, going and having a little chat, maybe at break time. I think it's trying to make people realise that maths is not meant to be a competition. Because some people, if they see it's like, oh, I'm the last person in class to get it right, then they lose that self-confidence.
So I try to teach my daughter it's not a race, it's about getting the right answer. So there might be other people that get it really quickly, but as long as you get to the end of the same equation, then who cares?
Because in the real world, if you're in a shop or you're looking at mortgage rates or thinking about interest rates for the bank, you've got time. No one's going to say, 5 seconds, deal's going to be gone. You've got time to sit through and think about it.
It is innate, though. I mean, my son, just like that, with numbers, and I look at him and wonder.
Well, he's got his daddy's genes, hasn't he?
I know, thank God.
That's all you need to know. Bobby, thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, Bobby.
Good
Are
day
you
at school.
available for tutoring?
And really appreciate you coming in this morning
Pleasure.
on this International Maths Day. OK. The time is how many minutes before? 27 minutes before 8.
Yes, well done. Stay with us. We'll be discussing why BBC presenter Fiona Bruce has now stepped back from her charity role after being accused of trivialising domestic abuse. Louisa Zisman and Norman Baker discussing that and the rest of the papers in just a moment.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
Is the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island's story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Let's bring you up to date with this morning's front pages of the newspapers. Here's how they stack up.
The Times is leading with the Prime Minister's submarine deal as he warns of a difficult and dangerous decade ahead.
Telegraph focuses on Jeremy Hunt's boost for pensioners ahead of tomorrow's budget.
The Mail says Gary Lineker's Match of the Day return is a slap in the face for BBC licence fee payers.
And we go through the papers this morning in the company of Louisa Zisman and Norman Baker.
We should say, before we get into the papers, we were just discussing maths with them, and both of them got those questions right. So both good at maths. I should point out, Louisa, a woman of many talents, though, also a fantastic horse rider. And I actually asked our team to show this video that you posted on social media, because in a second, and actually... no hands, and you're galloping along the beach.
Looks like Xena Warrior Princess, so it does. It's
just what you do in your spare time.
Cowboy boots. You two told me it was snowing in Morocco last time.
I know, sorry.
It was boiling.
Oh. Well, I'm glad you prepared for the cold weather with your outfit, packed your snow boots and everything.
Packed my gold cowboy boots and my bikini.
That wasn't even your horse then?
No, do you know, I had the best time. I was camping off-grid for 3 days. It was amazing.
Wow.
There was no toilet, no shower. I was reconnected with nature, guys.
Well, I can see. Were you bareback riding there?
No, I had a saddle on there.
Right.
But you let go of the reins,
yeah.
which is...
I think we should run that again, just to get a good look at that, because this is some horsemanship that we're talking about here. It really is top level.
It's frozen. You have to take our word for it. Okay. If people were listening on the radio, it's the most fantastic horse ride. That was galloping along the beach.
Yeah, lovely.
Lucky you.
The best feeling in the world.
Yeah.
Well, let's put you to work now. Guardian, 5 in the Guardian, and it's in a number of newspapers as well. Fiona Bruce steps back from a domestic abuse charity. Why?
This is just... again, devastating for her. She's been an ambassador for the charity Refuge for 25 years, talking about on telly, and Stanley Johnson came up, Boris Johnson's father, and she had to point out. Someone said he was a wife beater, and obviously you can't just blanket say that without any kind of context. So she's contextualised the conversation and said what we're talking about is he'd been accused of breaking his wife's nose and that she ended up in hospital. And she has faced the biggest backlash over this, which is just
So she said this was a one-off incident.
Yeah.
She basically gave the source of where the allegation came from, which was in a Tom Bauer book. And she got backlash for being what was effectively just doing her job and quoting the source and giving the legal context in case Stanley Johnson, arguably, could come out and say...
could come. You always have to, I don't know if people realise that when they watch this, but you have to go back to the source and quote that, especially as the presenter on the show. And she has just faced a devastatingly unfair backlash for this. And it just, again, is typical of our cancel culture. We're not... no one's even considering the accusations against Stanley Johnson.
Yeah.
It's all about Fiona Bruce and how can she say this and trivialise domestic violence, which she absolutely hasn't done. She's been working with Refuge for 25 years.
Yeah. Norman?
Just awful.
She's been a professional broadcaster and done her job properly.
Yeah.
And no one can question her commitment to tackling domestic violence. I mean, and it's a tragedy that she's been forced off that particular post. And actually, Louise is right. The idea that Stanley Johnson can get away with it is absolutely astonishing.
I just want to say your mic has failed, so we'll get the floor manager.
We'll sort that. Having Mike McGinn. Louise, let's talk about The Sun. Why our country is going to the devil dogs.
Oh, so Crufts recently have come out and given safety guidelines. And basically, you know, during lockdown, we all bought dogs. I did buy a dog in lockdown. Yeah, I did, a lovely Labrador. And now life's returned to normal and you have all these dogs that are now suffering separation anxiety, a huge increase in dog attacks, people dying just in the last couple of years. Dog walker Natasha Johnson, only 28 years old, died. A 4-year-old little Alice Stones died. And interestingly, this article, the RSPCA have now come out and said that we should look at almost like a dog licence. And I think that's absolutely right. You know, they're animals that need to be trained, properly cared for. You have a lot of people buying dogs now for status. In Caerphilly in Cardiff, which has actually been dubbed the dog bite capital of the UK, 17 dogs have been seized there, all on suspicion of being illegal breeds. And there's a real trend now for these extra-large American bulldogs. And I think that someone came out, a lawyer actually, who sort of represents people who have had dog bites, and said, if you ask yourself why you're buying a dog, and if it's you're buying an extra-large American bulldog for status or to look, you know, imposing to other people, it's not the correct reason to buy a dog. But I just feel bad for all these dogs that aren't properly looked after. You know, we're a nation of dog lovers, but there's been a 34% rise in dog attacks
and you've got
in 5 years.
3 children as well. I don't know if your kids just go up to every single dog and want to stroke them. Mine do. And it actually frightens me now.
Yeah, I'm quite strict with mine just because of that. We've now got 2 red Labradors who are brilliant with the kids, and I always say to my children, ours are good, but you can't just go up to other people's dogs because you know, this little boy, Jack List, was only 10, mauled to death.
Yeah, horrible way to die.
Awful. And also, other people's dogs are being attacked by dogs that just aren't trained. You know, dogs that have no recall. I'm big on animal training, and I just think it's so irresponsible to buy an animal and then not to train it properly.
Agree with you.
Very true. Let's talk about the migrant bill, which got a reading in Parliament last night. And you're going to the Eye. What's their take on it? What did they report?
Well, I was cancelled by technology, but I'm back with you now, hopefully. This is Theresa May, the former Prime Minister, of course, weighing in against the bill introduced by the Home Secretary, the present Home Secretary. And Theresa May's commitment to this area is undisputed. And I know that because I was in the Home Office with her at the time. I was a minister responsible for tackling violence against women. And I know how much we saw in terms of trafficking of women, in particular children as well, actually, for sexual gratification. And Theresa May's making the point in the Commons yesterday that legislation will actually prevent genuine victims of modern slavery being identified to be sent back to where they've been subject to abuse, and she's against a bill, not at least for that reason, but she's also against a bill, as I am, because it will cause children to be locked up who come into the country. And during the coalition government, one of the gains that the Lib Dems made was to actually end the incarceration of children. That's not being reintroduced by the Home Secretary.
But Norman, you know, Theresa May is going to stand up for her own, you know, anti-slavery legislation, isn't she?
Yes.
But it is being abused as a loophole by migrants. It is certainly being, you know, abused.
Of course, but I mean, we had Tom Tugendhat on the programme earlier on saying that he wants to end the abuse of people coming across the channel by smugglers. That's right, they are. But there's also people now going to be abused, but coming in and being sent straight back because there's no right of appeal, no method for them to be identified as victims of modern slavery. And, you know, some of the processes that these women and children have gone through in their own countries, some of the abuse they've suffered, and to arrive here and then be told, we're not even going to look at your case, you're going to be sent straight back, it's just inhumane.
OK.
Getting here is awful for them as well.
Let's go to the eye, and we're talking about taxes. We've got the budget tomorrow, Norman, and the head of the IFS, or director of the IFS, he says that the era of low taxes is over.
Yes, it's not a very happy story, is it? We're not very happy stories this morning. This is Paul Johnson, who is, as you say, the director of the Institute of Fiscal Studies, who says that, basically, he says that people they don't want cuts to public expenditure, they want pensions to be protected, they want the NHS to be protected, and the consequence of that is that we're going to have to pay taxes at a higher level for some time. And he mentions also that the average take now, tax burden is 37.5% coming up, and it was traditionally around about 30 to 32. And he says there's no way that's going to go down, and his only solution for it, by the way, is better access to the EU single market.
Right, well, that's unlikely to happen, even if the Labour government comes in. Right, Louisa, The Times. Sunak is worried about what his daughter is exposed to online as she gets her first mobile phone.
Yeah, this struck me because I also have a 12-year-old who has a mobile phone, and he's talking about how he's worried about what his daughter sees online, and at the same time you want to protect your children online, but you don't want them to be alienated from their friend group on things like Snapchat. So it's really difficult, but there is being a new bill introduced which gives Ofcom apparently all the powers it needs to regulate what children are being exposed to. I have my doubts over that, and I really feel strongly actually about things like Snapchat, Instagram. There's a new one now called Be Real. I mean, I would consider myself quite a cool mum, but even I can't keep up with it. And I really, really think that the government has a huge responsibility to crack down on these apps that are allowing children online and to be exposed to certain things. And there has to be some kind of sign-up where a passport is submitted so that that child is of age. And I think we should raise the age. Snapchat is the absolute devil. It's the bane of my life at school.
Yeah, well, France have done similar with porn. You have to submit passport type things, and they're moving quite far down that road. It's interesting as a parent, you know, to hear you say
awful.
that.
Well, it's interesting. If you identify with what Louisa is saying, please do let us know. You disagree, let us know as well. Norman and Louisa will be back in 40 minutes' time. For the moment, we say thank you to you. We're going to bring you the latest fat jab weight loss. It's a diabetes drug, but anyway, a lot of people are using it for weight loss. We're going to bring you that next.
Yes, but first a look ahead to the budget. The Chancellor is looking at increasing the lifetime pension allowance in an attempt to reverse the trend of early retirements. It's understood Jeremy Hunt's considering allowing you to put more money into your pension pot before being taxed.
I don't pronounce your surname.
The UK lost a total of 220,000 working days to strike action in January, according to new ONS data. Rail workers, bus drivers and NHS staff and teachers staged walkouts, with the education sector affected the most.
And Sir Brian May will be awarded a knighthood later today at Buckingham Palace after being recognised in the New Year's honours for his services to music and charity. The Queen guitarist is known for some of the most iconic riffs in popular music, including the famous solo on Don't Stop Me Now.
Now, it's been talk of the town, this weight loss aid already being loved by celebrities and referenced to by Jimmy Kimmel at this year's Oscars, and it's been called a game changer.
Yeah, it's an appetite suppressant injection. It's soon to become available through the NHS, with health officials warning that it isn't a quick fix and side effects have to be considered.
Well, let's speak to cosmetic nurse Sarah Cittadino. Good morning to you, Sarah. Is this a welcome development?
It is, it is. I am, and I have been for the drug actually when it's used appropriately. Now, we are going to see this drug, and we have seen it being misused, overused, abused. And that's the scary thing, right, with any drug that comes to the market, especially in the aesthetics industry, because we know that the industry is so unregulated.
Sarah, have you used it?
Personally, I can't lie, yes, I have used it.
Oh, right, OK.
And
side effects?
Side effects are rotten, I won't lie. So nausea, fatigue, headaches, reflux, constipation,
I think
diarrhea.
I'd rather be fat.
Yeah, yeah, I didn't last very long on it, I must say, because we have to be able to function in the real world, right? I run a business, I have children, and it wasn't something that I could actually facilitate into my life.
What people are talking about with this would be the dose of sort of, what, 1 injection a month or something like that. Was that the sort of dosage that you were on?
Yeah, so it's 1 injection a week.
A week? Right, okay.
So there is currently 2 drugs at the moment, and we've got the Ozempic and Saxenda, both licensed for diabetes. Now, one is a daily injection and one is a weekly injection. So what we're going to see come to the market is most likely Wegovy, which is the Ozempic, and that will be once-a-week injection, which is more favourable to inject once a week than once a day. But again, it's a dial-up pen. You have to do it yourself at home. So there is room for medication error. People with needle phobias, they are looking at bringing in an oral form as well. However, yes, it is a needle.
But this is going to be prescription only, and it could be a game changer for those people who have a BMI over 30 and just cannot shed the weight.
Absolutely. This is what we look at as healthcare practitioners, right? You know, our biggest crisis at the moment is obesity. You look at cardiovascular disease, you look at stroke, diabetes. People that suffer with weight gain and really cannot remove this weight, it's going to be a game changer. It's going to be a lease on life for them and an option. And as long as it's well controlled, you have got the right practitioner that's doing the right follow-ups, the right pathology, making sure that all your hormones are intact, then actually the drug will have a really nice outcome.
This has been developed, people realise this works because people with diabetes have been using it up until now with positive effects. I mean, I did ask you for the side effects there, so that is a difficult one for people to deal with. But if it reduces your weight, and it has been proven to do so.
Exactly. Right? And it's always benefit versus risk. And I always look up with the patient, if that patient is going to benefit from this drug, their quality of life, ongoing health issues, comorbidities, if these things are going to be improved, then absolutely this drug should be available.
But the side effects that you describe were generally discomfort. Are there any more serious ones that, you know, could actually have a health negative connotations?
So long-term use, it hasn't been used for weight loss long-term, so we are unsure of that at the moment. There is a boxed warning of thyroid medullary cancer. Now, this is quite alarming. It hasn't been proven in humans. It has been proven in rodents. So it is a boxed warning. You do have to take that into consideration. Anyone with an existing illness like that would obviously not be able to take the drug. Pregnancy breastfeeding would prevent someone from taking it. Anyone with kidney issues, or any ongoing forms of issues like medical.
But Sarah, what are they saying in terms of percentage weight loss?
So it's really subjective. So I've seen different studies, and personally from prescribing it and also having it, we generally were seeing around about 5 pounds a week. We did see up to a stone in 4 weeks of weight loss. It is rapid.
And as a cosmetic nurse, you would be qualified to prescribe this drug?
Absolutely.
OK, so it doesn't have to be a doctor?
Well, I'm a prescribing nurse, so if you're you have to be able to prescribe a drug, and off the basis of that, this has to be within your scope of practice. So you have to understand the drug, the side effects, and be able to competently give that to a patient.
So we're talking about this being dispensed on the NHS. If you wanted to go privately and pay for this, what would one of these injections cost, or a course of these injections cost?
So this is really alarming, guys, because we actually prescribe this drug at £499 for a 6-week course. Now, it's now available online at £160 and £99 on online pharmacies in an unlicensed capacity. Now, whether that comes to the NHS and it's actually free for the right patient, or if you're paying it private, it could vary. There is going to be no cap on this drug. So therefore, this is quite alarming, because the access to this drug drug. You can get it extremely cheap, but I'd be very worried about that, because what kind of support are you going to be getting if you're going to be getting it online? Is someone going to be running blood profile of you? Are they going to be making sure you are losing weight, but appropriately? And what happens once you've lost the weight?
Yeah, and also we know all those people with eating disorders that could potentially abuse it if they're able to get their hands on it for cheap. But we're out of time, Sarah Satini. Absolutely fascinating. Thank you very much for telling us all about it.
So the good news is you can get it, you can prescribe it. It costs anything from £200 to £500. You will probably lose a stone in a month, but it's very probable you will have constipation, you will have nausea. You'll feel pretty rough. You'll not feel like looking at food.
I mean, you'll look fabulous, but you might not feel it.
OK, we have to leave it there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Right, we're going to be back after the break. Big news of the day is the submarine deal between America, Australia and the UK. Talking about that, all to come after the weather.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things. We've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates. Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prisons.
I'm completely stunned. I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed. So I guess they've always been quite woke. That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Hello, I'm Michael Portillo. You can join me every Sunday on GB News. Remember to subscribe to the GB News YouTube channel and to download the GB News app to stay up to date with the latest GB News content. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless, and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
The The size of the UK's nuclear submarine fleet could double under a new defence deal with America and Australia.
Good morning. It's coming up to 8 o'clock. It's Tuesday, the 14th of March. You're watching and listening to Breakfast on GB News with Eamonn and Isabel. Thanks for tuning in.
OK, here's what's leading the news this morning. The Prime Minister's vowed to keep the oceans free as he announces a major deal with the United States and Australia to build a new fleet of nuclear submarines. Security Minister Tom Tugendhat says the agreement is an important step forward.
This is going to create a single nuclear boat fleet that will enable us to operate in 3 oceans and with partners around the world. Look, this partnership between Australia, the United States and the United Kingdom is enormously important.
The Chancellor will move to stop people from retiring early by boosting the tax-free allowance for pensions to a record level. It'll be included in his budget tomorrow and could see the allowance raised by £500,000.
The chairman of the BBC is under pressure to resign following a climb down in its standoff with Gary Lineker. Yesterday, the corporation's Director General announced a review of its social media guidelines and apologised for grey areas.
A man has died following a gas blast that destroyed a house in Swansea. 3 others were taken to hospital following the explosion, which shook houses miles away.
And the paedophile former pop star Gary Glitter has been recalled to prison for breaching bail conditions. An investigation found Glitter bragging about accessing the so-called dark web a month after his release from jail.
And get in touch the usual way via Twitter or email gbviews@gbnews.uk and let us know where you're watching or listening from. Just to say, a couple of the emails coming in about eating squirrel. We're going to be talking about this a little bit later in the programme. Jonathan
is this
says...
kill squirrel, or is this...
No, this is, I guess, shoot to
squirrel?
kill, or, yeah. I don't think I'd eat squirrel. They're too cute, and they also eat lots of rubbish from the ground that humans leave. Kathy says, reminds me of the excellent programme Friday Night Dinner. Fond memories of Paul Ritter. And Chris says, I ate squirrel and it tastes like a cross between chicken and frog's legs. Very tender.
A cross between chicken and frog's legs.
I'm not sure you're persuading us. Anyway, keep your thoughts coming in. We'll talk about that a little bit later on in the show.
Right now, we'll talk about the Prime Minister who's vowed to stand shoulder to shoulder against aggression from China as he announced a new deal to build nuclear submarines in Britain.
The agreement, unveiled alongside President Joe Biden and the Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, could see the size of the country's nuclear fleet double.
Speaking to our political editor, Darren McCaffrey, Rishi Sunak said he's doing what's necessary to keep the country safe.
Our approach is completely aligned with that of our closest allies. America, Australia, Japan, Canada, all of us are on the same page in how we think about China, how we're approaching it. And I'd say to everyone, know that you're our allies as a country, are all working together, we share the same view and we'll act together.
Well, earlier, Security Minister Tom Tugendhat told us the government is doing what it can to respond to challenges from China.
The reality is dealing with China is going to require a whole-of-government approach. And that's why the integrated review that was published yesterday is so important. Because it doesn't just talk about the military element, and there I can, if you like, I can point to the £5 billion increase in the defence budget and the aspiration for 2.5%. I can point to the doubling of money to deal with the challenge of China, which is going to include things like language learning and making sure that officials and senior officers and so on are much more aware of what China is up to. But I can also point to any number of different areas, like the way in which the Defending Democracy Task Force that I'm lucky enough to chair has set up different ways to approach the challenge of police stations, secret police stations by the Chinese state, or indeed repression by the Chinese state of Chinese citizens here in the UK. So this is a whole-of-government approach, and the Aukus element, the defence element that the Prime Minister was in San Diego signing, is only one aspect of it, and there's much more about this to come. So this is a whole-of-government approach. It involves education, it involves the police, it involves so many different aspects of our intelligence services.
Of MP Mark Francois in the studio with his view on all of this. Mark, what do you think?
I think the Prime Minister should be commended. This is incredibly good news. And the Aukus agreement between these 3 powers, in British terms, means this is, if you like, global Britain made flesh, or perhaps made metal in this case. This shows us working with 2 of our traditionally strongest allies collectively to help contain Chinese expansionism in the Pacific. And it's also fantastic industrially, this deal, and eventually they will buy an updated version of our astute submarine, is incredibly good news industrially for Barrow. So it's not just global Britain, it's also levelling up at the same time.
What about some of the credit being given to Boris Johnson? Because originally this deal, this pact that Rishi Sunak's being able to stand shoulder to shoulder with President Biden and Prime Minister Albanese was actually, you know, choreographed and written up under Boris Johnson.
Well, I don't think it's so much a battle for who gets the credit. I think Ronald Reagan said you can achieve almost anything in politics providing you don't mind who gets the credit. I think you can give it to both of those men. But I think it's really important in terms of Western security. I serve on the House of Commons Defence Committee, and we've seen the growth of China. We've seen some of President Xi's statements about Taiwan, and these are very worrying. So what you're seeing here is the United States, Great Britain and Australia collaborating politically, militarily and industrially to defend Western values and to help deter China from adventurism, which could become extremely dangerous.
What do you do, Mark, with a problem like China? Because, you know, despite all this strong talk from the government and the three governments involved in this, they're all desperate to do business with China as well.
I don't think that means we never trade with China, but I think we need to do it with our eyes wide open. Remember, the Chinese Communist Party that run China. China is not a democracy, it's an autocracy. And they lock up 1 million Uyghurs in effectively concentration camps for having the temerity to believe in God. So that doesn't mean we should never trade with them, but it means we should do with it with our eyes wide open and understand that militarily they have a very different view of the world from us.
Yeah, and the Prime Minister describing them as being more authoritarian at home, more assertive overseas, but stopping short of calling them a true threat, calling them a challenge instead. A bit of tiptoeing, perhaps.
Well, it's interesting. If you look at the number 10 press release that was issued alongside the Integrated Review White Paper, that uses the word threat. And there was some debate in the Commons yesterday. Ian Duncan Smith, who's sanctioned by the Chinese, and I think proud of it, highlighted this. So number 10 have been talking about a threat.
Was it in the context of an economic threat? Was the phrase, which again is watered down from acknowledging them as, you know, perhaps more of a general threat?
Well, if I lived on Taiwan, I know what word I would use. So I think we want, if we can, to have positive relations with China. But I think history shows we have to be clear-eyed when dealing with undemocratic regimes. And that brings us back to Aukus. So this is all three nations investing collectively together in our values and in our security. It also has great industrial benefits, but ultimately it's there to keep the West and our values safe. And that's why, whether it's Rishi Sunak or Boris Johnson, really, I think it's fair to say the government should be commended for this, because hopefully we will all sleep a little bit safer in our beds as a result.
Mark, serious question though. When you go home to your constituency, wherever you live, and you do sit on a Commons Defence Committee,
yes, sir.
Are you worried that your television may be Chinese, or that your fridge is Chinese, or that you may be being listened to?
I don't think I'm being listened to via my fridge. Which I think is German, actually. But I do think there are serious issues about Huawei and about the access that they had to our 5G network. If you talk to Tom Tugendhat, I think, you know, he could tell you some worrying things about TikTok. So I just think we need to be careful about how we use Chinese technology. And I think we certainly need to make sure we don't deploy it in areas which are particularly sensitive in security terms.
Mark, I want to ask you about the immigration bill before we let you go. It passed through its second reading, I believe, in the Commons last night, yes. With a majority of Conservatives voting for it. There were a few notable exceptions. The former Prime Minister Theresa May and a number of other former ministers, and Robert Buckland this morning publicly saying that the UK risks looking guilty of ineffective authoritarianism. So we've got the Prime Minister criticising authoritarianism in China, but a former minister accusing this bill of authoritarianism at home.
Well, the difference between us and China is we're a genuine democracy, and at the end we will have a general election within 2 years, and People can vote at the ballot box to choose the government that they want. They don't have that option in China. In China, even if you go online and complain about the government of the day, you disappear, or you may disappear at 3 o'clock the following morning. And, we even had an incident where Chinese diplomats were beating up people on British soil. So I think it's about time the Foreign Office stopped sort of pussyfooting around about this. And actually, we were prepared to stand up to bullying, which is what that was.
Marc-Francois, thank you. Very good listening to you. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on.
Thank you very much. 8:10 is the time ahead of the Chancellor's budget. Tomorrow, our Deputy Political Editor, Tom Harwood, has been taking a look at the battle within the Conservative Party over corporation tax.
It was Liz Truss's promise to reverse Rishi Sunak's planned rise in the tax that helped propel her to number 10. And ahead of this week's budget, Tory backbenchers are pushing the government to change tack and not raise taxes on British businesses.
By putting the tax rate up, he will experience falling revenues, not rising revenues. Every time Conservative chancellors have had the courage to cut corporation tax rates, the amount we collect has gone up. And just look at the position in the Republic of Ireland. They have a rate much lower than ours, and they collect 4 times as much business tax per head as we do, because the companies pour into Ireland to invest and set up their HQs. Well, my message to Jeremy Hunt is he's got a portrait of Nigel Lawson hanging on the wall in his study. He says he's a great admirer of Nigel Lawson. Did what Nigel did, Jeremy. Cut the taxes and you'll get more revenue and a happier country.
So how might the Chancellor respond to this pressure? One idea is to mitigate the tax rise by allowing companies to count capital investment against their corporation tax bill. Currently, a policy called the super deduction is in place, although it's due to end next month. Robert Colville of the Centre for Policy Studies believes the Chancellor would be wise to take forward a form of it to mitigate the damage of the corporation tax hike.
The super deduction has had an effect in areas like the North, in the Midlands, in sort of for manufacturing firms. I mean, the evidence is pretty good that it's helped those kind of firms, and of course those are the kind of people the government is quite keen on at the moment. Our modelling shows that in the long term, that doing that for plant and machinery probably adds 1.2% to the country's GDP at a long-term cost of about £2 or £3 billion a year.
And speaking to GB News last week, the Chancellor hinted that this is exactly what he's looking at. Jeremy Hunt told Esther McVeigh and Philip Davies that the headline rate of tax matters less than the effective rate, the amount of tax that is actually paid.
We need to have the lowest effective corporation taxes, because the headline rate, which by the way, even at 25%, is lower than nearly all our major rivals, France, Germany, and so on. But what actually matters, because a lot of companies are allowed to count their capital expenditure against their corporation tax bill. Now, one of the ways that George Osborne reduced corporation tax headline rates was that he got rid of those capital allowances. But for manufacturing industry, such as AstraZeneca in your part of the world, those capital allowances work. So I would say we do want to bring down our effective corporation tax, the total amount people pay as corporation tax as a proportion of their profits. We do want to bring those down.
It looks like Conservative backbenchers will not get their wish for a full-scale reversal of this rise to corporation tax. But what they might get is some mitigation, a full expensing regime, which might go some way to quell some of that backbench discontent. Tom Harwood, GB News.
And Tom joins us in the studio. I think you're a bit optimistic. I think there's going to be a bit of discontent tomorrow.
I think there certainly will be. However, the question is, to what extent will it assert itself? And it does look like there will be this, perhaps a rabbit out of the hat in terms of a full expensing regime that many companies, and we've seen this morning that, for example, the Confederation of British Industry has been railing against this corporation tax rise. We might well see some sort of statement from them tomorrow saying that it's not as bad as they feared, because there's this sort of expensing regime that means those tax bills are less high than they could have been. Yeah, we've got the Institute for Fiscal Studies also coming out saying we need to get used to a high tax burden in this country for decades to come, which is cheery reading. The Office for National Statistics this morning with their latest employment figures out. Really interesting, because the headlines on the front of the papers previewing
doing a pensions move from the Chancellor tomorrow in a bid to try and get people back into the workplace, because we're still lagging behind most of our sort of rivals, really, post-pandemic on this.
Absolutely. The pensions allowance currently sits at around £1 million that you can save in your pension before it has extra taxes added to it. But obviously that means that people, well, might think that once they reach that level of their pension, they might as well retire, because there's diminishing returns the more that they add to their pension. So one of the ideas from the Treasury is to raise that, and we've seen widely reported, previewed, I should say, this morning, that it would rise from £1 million to £1.8 million, almost a doubling of that allowance, meaning that particularly the well-paid public sector roles, for example, doctors who are taking early retirement right now for financial reasons, would be less incentivised to take that early retirement, because they could actually contribute more to their pension if they stayed in work. That's one of the ideas, to try and get people back into the workforce, because currently, after COVID, we saw a mass exodus, really, of people from the workforce. We now have an incredibly tight labour market, and that's a real worry in terms of the peculiar situation that we have now, which is record job vacancies, but also growth on the floor.
I've got to ask you about strikes. You talked about the well-paid doctors there. Of course, junior doctors very unhappy about their pay. A lot of them saying baristas and coffee shops get paid more. They're on strike day 2 today. Lots of people at home will have their operations being cancelled. And then tomorrow and Thursday, all the schools closing again for school strikes. The government just don't seem to be getting a grip of this. And the ONS saying this morning, 220 days lost in January alone to strike action.
And this is despite the talks that are ongoing between the government and the various representatives of these professions. I think that it is likely we will see some sort of settlement within the budget that will offer something that is much more generous towards these striking groups. One of the reasons it seemed that we saw some of these strikes sort of paused or delayed in recent weeks is there seems to be some sort of understanding that the government might have found a bit more money. All very murky. The government's not committing to anything publicly. But of course, the finances we learnt just a few weeks ago are in a little bit better shape than the OBR had predicted. And it looks likely that the government would, instead of putting that money towards tax cuts, would prefer to put that money towards public sector pay. And that would, to their mind, help quell some of that discontent. Whether it will be enough, however, well, that's for the negotiations to find out.
OK, well, we look forward to finding out more detail in the budget tomorrow. For now, Tom, thank you very much.
But today is International Maths Day. Stephen Cleethorpe said, I left school without any qualifications. Maths was a nightmare, but I still managed over 30 years in the service of my country without maths. Yvonne says, at 6, my son wasn't any good at it. I bought him a dartboard and I never looked back. Yeah, that's absolutely true. Such a mathematical sport, that one is. Duncan says, leave maths to the mathematicians, gardening to the gardeners and nursing to nurses.
Don't you have a funny story about being asked to host the darts?
Yes, I hosted the darts for 3 years, the World Darts Championships at Frimley Green.
Yeah. And how did you find that with your maths inadequacies?
I bluffed it.
Yeah.
I bluffed it. 18 minutes past 8 o'clock. A man has died following a gas blast that destroyed a house in Swansea. 3 others were taken to hospital following the explosion, which shook houses miles away.
Well, South Wales Police have started an investigation to establish the exact cause, and our reporter Will Hollis is in Swansea for us this morning. Will, really shocking, and it seems as though these kinds of gas explosions are on the rise.
Yes, well, yesterday a major incident was declared in relation to what I'm told is still a suspected gas explosion. If you just look down behind me, if I just step to the side, you can see in the background that there is still a large police presence here on Clydach Road, which is in Morriston in South Wales in Swansea. You can see that since we last spoke around about an hour ago, a truck has arrived and in fact 2 trucks have arrived, and it's quite safely to assume that that's going to be the trucks that are used to clear up the road and start to clear away the remains of what is somebody's home and the remains of people's homes around. Now, the real tragedy, of course, that we heard late last night is that a man who had been unaccounted for had been recovered, and the family of that man have been told of his tragic passing. We also know that 3 people yesterday were taken to hospital, and it's believed that this morning one of those people is still believed to be in hospital. There is a massive ongoing police presence, but what you'll find very few of here on Cliddock Road is residents. I've only managed to speak to 1 or 2 people this morning. One gentleman told me that he was allowed back into his home because his father is very ill and that he needs to be quite close to medication, but few people are actually on this road right now because it's simply not safe for them to go right into where their houses are. National Grid have been here this morning. They've been going around with machines that appear to be used to detect electricity and to detect gas, but I've been told by National Grid this morning that some people are still without power, and Wales and West Utilities say that they are still trying to determine exactly what happened here. I said a few moments ago that it is still a suspected gas explosion because even though this happened yesterday at 11 o'clock, it is still very early days. From the police perspective, as well as all of the other people who are working here, they say that while they are still trying to figure out exactly what happened here, they are asking people to stay away, but really that their thoughts are with the gentleman who has died, was pronounced dead yesterday, and a man who was described as really quite lovely.
Thank you so much, Will, for that update.
Paedophile pop star Gary Glitter has been recalled to jail after breaching his licensing conditions.
The 78-year-old had been on release for 6 weeks, and our national reporter Paul Hawkins is outside the Ministry of Justice for us with this story this morning. Give us the details of this then, because it seems he breached the terms of his licence pretty quickly.
Yeah, and officially the Ministry of Justice are not saying why he breached those terms of his licence, but it's being widely reported that he tried to access the dark web, the part of the internet that's kind of hidden, that you need special search engines to access. It's full of criminal activity. And he tried to access the dark web while he was in a bail hostel on licence. This is Gary Glitter, well-known pop star from the 1970s, also known as Paul Geddes, now 79 years old, jailed in 2015 for attempted rape, 4 counts of indecent assault, and 1 of having sex with a girl under the age of 13. He was given a 16-year sentence. He served half of it, as I say, was released on licence last February. Yes, he's subject to licence conditions while he was out on bail, but he's been recalled to Her Majesty's Prison, the Verne. That's a low security Category C prison in Dorset, and the parole board will now try to establish exactly how and whether he has indeed breached those terms of his licence and whether he should be re-released.
Thank you.
Right, we'll take a break. Coming up next, we're off to the races with Paul Coyte ahead of the start of Cheltenham, which begins today, the festival.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The people's channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me. So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Welcome back. It's 8:26. Still to come on the programme.
8:45, meet the chef who not only thinks eating squirrel can save the planet, he believes you can make it taste delish.
And just after 9, the legendary former newspaper editor Eve Pollard gives us her take on the Gary Lineker saga as he prepares to make his return to Match of the Day.
You can register your view if you want. You know how to do it. GB Views at gbnews.uk. You can tweet at GB News. Looking at the back pages, and here's what's on them. BBC Sport at war, according to the Mail. There's a huge rift over the handling of the Lineker Gate case at the organisation, both on screen and behind it as well. In the Mirror, Pep Guardiola wants his Man City side to leap into action at the Champions League. They play tonight, and the Times says Pep has taken an aim at Kevin De Bruyne for his poor form. Also, Sheffield Wednesday have had to cut the capacity of Hillsborough by 1,000 after a recent investigation into overcrowding. Paul Coyte is with us now, my friend. Good morning to you. First day of Cheltenham.
Yes, very good. Been going since 1860, Cheltenham Festival. I have tips. Obviously, how did I do last year?
Awful.
I think what happened is that when you went, I gave tips and it was disastrous. And then when you came back, I think I did have some winners after that.
Did you think so?
I pretty much know so,
No,
but it
because
was
Eamonn
all
went
ignored
almost
after
every
that.
day last
You
year.
just didn't trust me after that. So hundreds of thousands of people descending on Cheltenham, 4-day festival, you know, the biggest racing festival next to the Grand National that we've got in the country. And the big one is Constitution Hill, is a horse which is such a hot favourite.
Yeah.
It's one of these that's not even worth betting on because you'll probably end up...
Does the going affect it? There's big talk that the temperature would have got soft.
Yeah, the going is soft, but Constitution Hill is such an amazing horse. But the thing is, we're looking about sort of 3 to 1 on, which basically means that you're going to have to put £3 on to win £1. So unless you're going lots and lots of money,
written no money.
Just no money on
Unless you
that
put 3 mil in and you get an extra mil.
So Constitution Hill, yeah. So that's the Champions Hurdle. Although I have spoken to people about this and said, well, the thing is, when it's going over the fences, there's always a chance. It's never nailed on.
Very true.
You know, it could all of a sudden clip the top of a fence, something could happen. So it's very unlikely because it's such a hot favourite, but outsiders are way outsiders.
Could I talk about going over the fences as such? We hear the news that Dick Fosbury has died, has passed away at the age of 76. Very big impression. You and I would have been around 8, 9, 10 years of age at school at the time, and therefore he completely changed the way we were expected to do the high jump.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Well, I was one at the time. It was in 1968, and Dick Fosbury, it's the Fosbury flop. So obviously this is named after Dick Fosbury.
Whoa, now, look at him go.
Now, look, and we're showing it on there now, and it's black and white, 1968, Mexico Olympics, and he completely revolutionised the way of doing the high jump. So what he did is that nobody had done it that way. Would run up, turn, and then jump backwards. So straight after that, and he won the gold medal, set a new Olympic record. Everybody started doing it. So everybody, whether they were just doing the scissor kick or the straddle or different ways of doing it, this guy turned things around. So,
well, except for Isabel. Isabel continued to be traditional.
Well, we got taught the scissors when we were young, and then they introduced the Fosbury flop, but I couldn't do the Fosbury flop, and because I was taller than everybody else,
You could just do it easily.
I just did the scissors and cracked on and still won.
Really?
I was like 11, 12, 13, but...
See, I was saying, I used to miss the crash mat, because when you used to do Fosbury flop, as you would turn and throw yourself up, I found myself going parallel with the bar, which meant I would go over and then miss the crash mat and land on the floor, which is probably
have a lasting effect.
I don't know whether I hit my head or my shoulder.
I think you probably did.
Oh, that's where all your shoulder problems
It probably
came from.
is. But with Dick Fosbury, see, this is the sad part of the story. When it got to 1972 in the Munich Olympics, everybody was doing his move. Everybody was doing the Fosbury flop. So Dick didn't actually even qualify for the final of the high jump because everybody was doing his move and everybody did it better than he did. But he was the originator.
Well, are there any other examples of people who lent their name to a technique in sport?
There are a few. If we think of Johan Cruyff, the Cruyff turn, there's a few things that are named after different sports stars, and it will stay with them forever. So
Can't pretend the Cruyff turn ever.
Did you never do
my life at school?
You were still scissoring
at
this point.
Not as famous as the Fosbury flop.
Okay,
no way.
so how about the Panenka penalty, which we've spoken about, where Antonin Panenka, 1976, ran up to and you see these little dinks.
Just football.
That's in football. The Ali Shuffle, I guess, Muhammad Ali, there's the Ali Shuffle.
Is that boxing?
That's
You're
in
gonna
boxing.
Have to break it down for me here.
OK, how about ice skating?
Oh.
The triple Lutz, which was named after...
Somebody called Lutz.
Very good. And what about the triple Salchow?
Well, who's Mr. Salchow?
I think it was John Solarco, who used to play for Crystal Palace. No, the triple Salchow is another one. So these are things that defined their career. It's something they invented and then have then gone on. So the Fosbury flop, I think, is the most famous of all of them.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I actually thought it was the
triple Salchow.
I've heard of the triple Salchow. It's what it is that they would spin 3 times, and I think it's the side of the skate that they would land on and then skate away. That's something I didn't actually try.
What a legacy.
Probably a good thing.
Well, he wasn't British, was he, Dick Fosbury?
No, he's American.
American guy.
Yeah.
Talking about American.
Yes.
Baseball, right? They're famous for baseball.
Yeah.
But I didn't realise there was a Great Britain baseball team.
The thing that bugs me more than anything else with baseball is that they have the World Series and they are American teams.
Yeah.
And whenever they win, they say at the end, we're the world champions. And it's like, well...
They're not.
Actually, you're not. It's like us saying in the Premier League, we're the world champions. It doesn't work that way. So what they actually do have is the World Baseball Classic. So there's different countries will take part. And I've found this out as there is a Great Britain team. Now, the Great Britain team, see, if there's a picture there, I don't know if we can see the picture again, of the shirt, of the jersey that they wear. And American fans... Now, look, can you see any problem with that? You see a man with a Great Britain shirt on.
Right.
And the Americans are actually mocking us for the font that is being used. I know, for the font on the front of the shirt. They're just saying, oh, it looks like all they've done. They've just gone on Word and then just put anything on there and just put Great Britain on the front. I don't know whether we're supposed to have curly lettering or make it look flashier, but we are young when it comes to baseball. Although, really, at the end of the day, we invented the sport because it started with rounders, and although the Americans deny it, rounders is where baseball began. So, therefore, we really are the originators of baseball.
But what I don't understand about the Americans is why do they dress in their pyjamas to play are there comfies to play baseball?
See, they haven't changed.
It's ridiculous outfit,
It's crazy.
I like it.
Yeah, well, I think they call them knickerbockers that they will wear. And the thing is, the uniforms haven't changed at all over the years. I watched this... Honestly, for my sins, I found myself watching a 9-hour documentary about baseball, which was made by PBS. See, I know how to live. It started right at the beginning. Right up, and the thing is that where you get football and shirts change and fashions change, with baseball, it stays the same. No sponsorship, but the
could I ask you another
uniforms stay the same.
question?
Yes, sir.
So that they're their knickerbockers that they wear.
Yes.
Why is an ice cream called a Knickerbocker Glory? Why is there an ice cream called Knickerbocker? How does that relate to your Knickerbockers?
Well, it started off because the New York Yankees that won the World Series back in the 1920s were handing out ice creams. And that was what they were giving for free to celebrate them winning the World Series for the first time. So they called it the Glory. It's a complete lie, but it's the closest thing I could come up. You put me on the spot.
How was I
eating the ice cream from my hands? But that's the best.
I thought he has watched all 9 hours of that documentary.
And the ice cream documentary, the Mr. Whippy documentary.
We have to go because we need to talk about squirrels a little bit later on. We don't want to run out of time talking about eating them. Would you?
Of course not.
Yes or no?
All depends if it's red or grey.
Grey only?
No, not
all right.
No, they're rats.
That's your common man.
They're rats.
Squirrel.
You can't eat the red ones. They're endangered. Anyway, we have to go because it's not me, it's you.
I'm leaving at 9 to go to Cheltenham.
Are you actually?
Yeah.
You are.
Take your tips with you.
Yeah, I will.
I've
Take
been
your tips.
telling him to come to Cheltenham with me all week.
Oh, yeah, that's a whole other story. I'm going with Paul. Paul and I are
You're actually going to BAFTA breakfast with me, so I know that's nonsense.
OK. What are we going to be discussing?
It's not you, it's not me, it's Hugh.
It's you, right? It's you. Hugh Grant's rude behaviour, apparently, on the Oscar carpet. Louisa Zisman, Norman Baker having their say. Next.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Deebs & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners. On TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Monday to Thursdays on Farage. Here on GB News, we will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years, I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island's story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m, and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
The papers, Louisa Zisman, Norman Baker, with those. Where do you want to start, guys?
Well, I think Isabel was saying we should start with Gary Lineker, who's not quite out of the news yet. And more to the point, neither of the BBC top brass, because the Metro, which has time for sharp exit, which refers, to, of course, to Richard Sharp, the BBC chairman. And the reason why the BBC is a mess, in my view, is because they have political appointments. The chairman has donated to the Tory party. He's helped Boris Johnson with a loan, didn't declare that, by the way, to appointments panel. The Director General said was a previous Tory candidate. Robbie Gibb, who was Theresa May's Conservative advisor, is on the board. And you know, it makes it very difficult for them to be critical of the government. So they are biased in that sense.
Well, in the interest of balance, I should point out that it's not a new thing. The chairman's traditionally been a political appointment. There have been Labour chairmen, Labour-leaning chairmen in the past.
Yeah, but why is there a political appointment?
And where has he been? He's been MIA throughout all of this.
Well, he's deliberately keeping a low profile, but I mean, it makes it very difficult for the BBC to respond when also they're criticising people who are attacking the government and taking Lineker off air, but not taking people off air who criticise from the other end. And the fact of the matter is that Richard Sharp should not be there, in my view. He should resign or be removed. And the appointment of the BBC chairman and the BBC Director General should be people who are scrupulously non-political, and they should be journalists, in my view. It's a broadcasting organisation. They should be journalists.
You don't take offence, as many people who've been watching, listening this morning do, to the fact that the Director General has apologised for this whole furore, rather than actually making Gary Lineker apologise or face any form of punishment? Gary
Lineker was taken off air. You know, Alan Sugar and others who've been critical from the other end of the spectrum wouldn't even given a slap on the wrist. The BBC was inconsistent. Now, Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor yesterday, said the BBC has to be impartial and independent. I totally agree with him. It's not impartial and independent when they've got political appointments at the top of the organisation.
OK. Louisa, let's talk underwear. This is in the Star, page 20, the headline, Frilly Billies.
I've gone less highbrow.
That's all right. That's OK. We cover all sides of the coin.
I love this story. Look, I'm going to hold it up. So in China, because of all their censorship rules, they're now having to get males to model lingerie because the women aren't allowed to do it. So they've got blokes in lacy bodysuits and silk nightgowns and push-up bras. I'm not sure what the bras are pushing up. Yeah, the moves, although they don't look like they've got any moves. They look like little skinny men. But it's hilarious. They said the designs can't be modelled by our female colleagues, and they said this is not an attempt at sarcasm. They're being serious about complying with the rules. I just thought that was so funny.
So the rules being that you can't show cleavage, for instance, or leg, or...
Yeah, it's strange how women have been deemed too sexy to wear it, so they've put the blokes in it. Now would you see that, Eamonn, and want to buy that for Ruth?
No, wouldn't want to buy it for me either. No.
You might have better cleavage than them.
I think you're right. I think you're right there. We go to the Times, Norman.
I think that last idea is pants, by the way, that last story. On the Times, this is a story about the Office of National Statistics, who regularly keep a basket of things people buy to assess how inflation's going. Yeah. And they've taken out a whole range of things and put more stuff in. So what's come in are electric bikes, home security cameras, and frozen berries, apparently. And they've taken out Alco Pop's digital cameras, tampons, and also taken tampons out.
They've taken out tampons?
What?
They
People
have.
don't use tampons anymore?
Well, apparently they've been taking out the... they do use them, but they've taken out the list that the ONS uses to calculate inflation.
Wow.
But most important, from my point of view, as a vinyl junkie, they've taken out CDs because for the first time in 35 years, LPs, which I love, are outselling CDs again.
Oh,
Yeah.
look how your face lights up. No one uses CD. I mean, my kids don't even know what a CD is.
But you know what an LP is?
Yeah, like
Ah, there you go.
yeah, it's all
Yeah.
coming back.
It's all going full
retro.
circle.
Guys, let's talk about the Oscars last night and the night before, and Hugh Grant. So he's interviewed on the beige carpet.
Yeah, no red carpet.
For whatever reason, it's changed to beige. But how did he respond, Louisa?
He didn't want to be there. Lovely. I've always had a soft spot for Hugh Grant, and I thought this was funny. Isabel doesn't agree with me. He was so grumpy. Supermodel Ashley Graham was interviewing him, and she said, who are you excited to see? And he went, no one in particular. She said, and what are you wearing? A suit. I just thought he just
made a fool of her. And I thought for someone who's traded on, you know, basically being an affable British gent, he couldn't have displayed less of that. And it was like disdain. It wasn't even with humour. It was. I thought it was really.
I wonder why he went. He must have had to go. He had a cameo in a film, which the name of the film I can't remember, Glass Onion, and. She said, oh, you know, were you excited about being in that? And he went, well, I'm barely in it. I'm only in it for 3 seconds. So I think they obviously must have made him go.
Glass Onion was very good, actually, I have to say.
There's a viral video of him online. It's quite funny to watch.
Well, for my generation, Glass Onion's a Beatles song.
Oh, right.
Oh. Back to the LPs?
On the White Album, yeah.
I'm trying to think if there is a reference to that in the film. Probably. That's probably...
Yeah.
And it played it in the credits. There we go. I'm being reliably informed. Norman, you want to talk about faulty towers in inspired restaurants? Given a 0 hygiene rating, it's a bit faulty.
It's very faulty. This is in the Star. And this is a place where you apparently go if you want to go. I don't know why you would go. Customers go to be insulted by the staff. That's the idea if you want to go to a restaurant. But more than that, this is in Newport in Gwent, by the way, if you want to know, if you want to avoid it, I think. Karen's Diner. Apart from that, it's also been given kind of nul point by the local health inspectors who say it's not safe to eat there, effectively. And they've given them a long list of things to do to sort them out. So as well as being insulted, you're taking your life in your hands, it looks like.
Food poisoning and insults.
Thanks. Oh, 0 hygiene. It's enough to put anyone off.
But it is a bit like Faulty Towers, isn't it, really?
Yeah, exactly.
I actually did want to go there.
Did you?
Yeah, just for the banter.
Just for the banter.
Yeah,
but
they
now...
go and they throw your food at you. And they're like, there you go, you idiot. And worse, that we can't say on this show.
So we bid farewell, the Mirror tells us, to the oldest penguin in the world.
To Rosie. Look at Rosie. She was 32, and they claim that she's the oldest penguin in the world, and she was bred in captivity, I think. And the zookeeper that's had her has had her since she was 4 months old. I just thought that was so sad.
Which zoo was she in?
She was in... I did read this, and now I can't...
Was it in the UK?
Yeah. She started her life in Surrey, and then she was at... Sewerbury Hall and Gardens. And then at 4 months old, she was moved to East Yorkshire Zoo. She hatched chicks. Now, her offspring have great names. Twinny, Webster and Flip Flop.
Oh.
And she had her first grandchild called Pickle. And they're all still alive at the zoo. And I just thought, how that man has been with her for 32 years.
It's really sad. It's testament to the good care that they obviously gave her.
And then only really lived for 15 years.
Gosh, really?
Yeah.
It's twice the life expectancy.
Yeah, really good. Little Rosie, God rest her soul, her feathered soul.
I don't know how you can pick up a penguin in Surrey.
You're on fire, Norman.
I wonder what she tastes like if you were to eat her.
Eamonn,
we're going to talk about squirrels now.
Oh, yes. Would you eat squirrels?
Well, I don't eat meat or fish. So
right.
I don't eat meat either.
Norman.
Crikey, so I'm on my own here.
Would you?
Yeah, I'd give it a go.
Oh, God, you could
I'd give it a
you could
go.
do I'm a Celeb.
No, I couldn't. I can't do foreign things like eyes or testicles.
Well, Bear Grylls, there was a story about him today that I nearly picked up, and he used to be a staunch vegan, and now he started eating testicles, liver, pancreas, and he's promoting that in one of the papers today.
But there can't be anything good in those.
Well,
But Bear Grylls sounds like someone who is, in fact, a meat eater.
Yes, it does.
Yeah.
Doesn't refer to his food technique or choice of protein.
We'll say goodbye to you guys, Louisa and Orla, because we have got dinner being served or breakfast being served. Apparently they say eating grey squirrel is good for the environment, but what does it taste like? Who better to tell us on how you can cook up a squirrel supper than former River Cottage head chef, that's Tim Madams. Tim, good morning to you.
Good morning, Eamonn. How are you?
Well, I'm fine, mate. What about the squirrels in your life? Are they all dead, or what? How do you prepare squirrel for breakfast this morning? We're dying to know.
Well, I think it's important that we point out we're talking about grey squirrels that are already being culled as a sort of environmental management tool. So I'm not recommending anyone just goes out into the wild and starts randomly eating small furry creatures. That's not what this is about. This is a well thought out and ethical meat. So how would we cook them? Well, I mean, I've always been charmed by the idea of squirrel on a stick. So maybe squirrel tandoori would be good. But you're going to need a young squirrel, ideally, for something like that. If you're going to cook it quickly, you need a youngster. So that would be more for the autumn. At this time of year, you want to be braising them, picking the meat off, using the stock to make something else, maybe a stew, a casserole, some dumplings, or maybe a risotto with some wild garlic and bits and pieces in there.
People on the same page as you, people suggesting game pie, squirrel jerky. They say it's fat-free and high in protein. But this message from Linda jumped out to me. She said, my husband just asked, can you eat squirrel if you have a nut allergy?
Well, it's a good question, actually, and probably one for a nutritionist rather than myself. I mean, they obviously do eat a huge amount of nuts. Whether that nut fat contains the allergens in it that would cause a reaction, I don't know. I mean, maybe you'd have to rub a squirrel on your arm a bit first and just check.
What does it taste like? How would you describe the taste?
Okay, well, so somewhere between sort of pork and rabbit. I would suggest, good quality pork and rabbit. It's got that sort of slightly toothsome texture to it. They're a little bit more, a little bit tougher, perhaps, than most commonly available farmed meats, because they do a lot more acrobatics and daily exercise, obviously. But there is a nuttiness to them in the autumn time. If you have a young rabbit that's lived through the summer and into the autumn, they put on weight to get them through the winter. And at that time of year, they're very fatty, and that's when you'll get a nutty flavour from them.
We've been showing pictures of fluffy grey squirrels whilst we've been talking about this, and I do think it's a problem even for meat eaters to think about sometimes what meat actually is. And I know that that's something that the River Cottage you kind of tackle, because you're trying to talk about plate to, farm to plate, as you describe it. I mean, is that a problem that we have, that we don't think enough about where our food comes from? Because if we actually thought about pork or whatever, then we probably wouldn't eat any protein, would we?
Well, I think that's interesting conversation. Absolutely, we need to think very carefully about where all of our food comes from, regardless of whether that's a soya protein-based product from somewhere else or a meat-based product from somewhere local to you. It's important that we understand the implications of what we're eating, how it's farmed, the environmental impact that's available to us. And that's one of the things, one of my personal bugbears is that, for me, when I go into the shops and I buy something, I'm less interested in calories and nutrition. I'd much rather have a red, green or an amber in terms of sort of air miles or carbon footprint, because that's going to be my first decider on how I eat something.
I think squirrels are like rodents and that they eat rubbish. Is that true?
Well, any animal living in a sort of feral capacity, if you like. So grey squirrels are not indigenous to the United Kingdom. We don't have any up here in Scotland where I live these days. But if you put them in an environment where there's lots of other available food sources around, so if they're used to foraging for food, because that's what you do in the wild, if they then find a dustbin or some dropped rubbish, then they're probably likely to eat that. And I think I might have read somewhere that they hunt bird eggs and things as well. So they're not necessarily the strict vegetarian creatures that we might imagine they are.
Okay.
So where do you get your squirrels from now? Just to highlight, you're not advocating farming squirrels.
No, I'm really not. What I'm sort of advocating here is that, particularly, I mean, at the moment, the one that's in the news is that there's a group on Exmoor who are trying to protect some forestry. And to do that, they need to eradicate a lot of grey squirrels that are living there, and then they want to reintroduce red squirrels. Now, those grey squirrels are going to be killed anyway. So rather than, the vegetarian argument of saying if I don't eat meat, that will cause less meat to be grown and therefore killed, which is true. If you don't eat these squirrels, you're not going to stop them getting killed. So it sort of makes sense if you're a meat eater to sort of eat these because, otherwise they're going to go to waste.
Will they be shot? Just yes or no? Do you know about how you catch a squirrel?
Unlikely. I expect they'd be live trapped and then polished off, to order.
Gotcha.
Too much detail.
I'm
Tim Adams,
fascinated.
thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you very much indeed. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Tim. Really interesting. There we go. We do cover everything on this programme, don't we? Never thought we'd talk about that.
It'd be like eating rats, really, wouldn't it?
No, it'd be like eating... I don't know. I'll give it a go. Let us know your thoughts on that and the rest of the day's subjects. And after this, we'll be talking some more about the Prime Minister's vow to stand shoulder to shoulder against China with newspaper legend Eve Pollard.
Before we get there, we're going to look at the weather picture. Luke Mile with that.
Good morning and welcome to your weather forecast with Luke Mile. It's a bright and sunny start to the day for most of the UK, a much brighter day on offer, but it will be feeling colder with some wintry showers. And that's because our air is coming down from the north, coming from the Arctic, so a much colder direction than what we saw on Monday. Now, the cold front that we had yesterday has cleared away, but we are still seeing the risk of some showers around those northern, western and eastern exposed coasts that come inland. And you'll see plenty of fine and sunny weather around. Where we've got the snow showers, though, we do have a snow and ice warning in force. That stays out through the rest of the day. Gradually through the afternoon, we will see the skies clouding over for northern England and parts of Wales, where we could see the risk of some hill snow, accompanied by some fairly gusty winds and rain down to lower levels. But a colder day for all of us, temperatures in single figures for most, feeling colder than that when you factor in the strength of that breeze. Through Tuesday evening then, that rain, sleet and snow pushes its way smartly southwards. As skies clear behind then and winds ease down, it's going to be a cold night. You can see the blue exploding on the map there, suggesting quite a widespread frost as we start the day on Wednesday. Still with the risk of some snow showers affecting northern parts of Scotland. Temperatures in the countryside, though, sub-zero on Wednesday morning. You'll definitely need those ice scrapers out there. Do be careful for slippery surfaces as well. But as the day progresses, the best of the sunshine stays across eastern areas, because out to the west, you can see the next batch of rain pushing its way in, preceded by some hill snow, perhaps for Northern Ireland and North Wales. But I think for most of us, it will turn quite wet by the time we get to the second part of Wednesday. Still hanging on to the colder air across the east, but milder air starts pushing its way in from the west. And that's the theme as we head into the outlook. Temperatures starting to rise through Thursday and Friday, but staying fairly unsettled as well. I'll see you soon. Bye-bye.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference.
And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel. Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton Tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Hello, I'm Michael Portillo. You can join me every Sunday on GB News. Remember to subscribe to the GB News YouTube channel and to download the GB News app to stay up to date with the latest GB News content. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Lawrence Fox, on GB News. Frank, fun, fearless, and sometimes serious. Much as I love a Friday night punch-up, what I really want is a battle of ideas. I want to look at things differently. I want to hear different voices and engage with your unique experiences. Every Friday at 7 p.m. on GB News.
Hello, I'm Esther McVeigh.
And I'm Philip Davis.
Whether you're watching or listening on TV, online or on radio, we handpick the latest stories, debates and expert opinions for your weekend. So whether that's politics, news or showbiz, we've got it covered.
Join us every Saturday morning at 10 o'clock on GB News.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
The size of the UK's nuclear submarine fleet could double under a new defence deal with America and Australia.
Hello there, very good morning to you. It is 9 o'clock, Tuesday the 14th of March. You tuned into breakfast on GB News with Eamonn and Isabel.
Here's what's leading the news this morning. The Prime Minister has vowed to keep the oceans free as he announces a major deal with the United States and Australia to build a new fleet of nuclear-powered submarines. Security Minister Tom Tugendhat said the agreement is an important step.
This is going to create a single nuclear boat fleet that will enable us to operate in 3 oceans and with partners around the world. Look, this partnership between Australia, the United States and the United Kingdom is enormously important.
The Chancellor is trying to stop people from retiring early by boosting the tax-free allowance for pensions to a record level. It'll be included in his budget tomorrow and could see the allowance raised by £500,000.
The chairman of the BBC is under pressure to resign following a climb down in its standoff with Gary Lineker. Yesterday, the corporation's Director General announced a review of its social media guidelines and apologised for what he said were grey areas.
A man has died following a gas blast that destroyed a house in Swansea. 3 others were taken to hospital following the explosion, which shook houses miles away.
And the paedophile former pop star Gary Glitter has been recalled to prison for breaching his bail conditions. An investigation found Glitter bragging about accessing the so-called dark web a month after his release from jail. And you can get in touch either way via Twitter or email gbviews@gbnews.uk and let us know where you're watching or listening from.
So our top story this morning is the Prime Minister has vowed to stand shoulder to shoulder against aggression from China as he announced a new deal to build nuclear submarines in Britain.
The agreement, unveiled alongside President Joe Biden and Australian Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, could see the size of the country's nuclear fleet double.
Well, this morning, Security Minister Tom Tugendhat told us the government's doing what it can to respond to challenges from China.
The reality is dealing with China is going to require a whole-of-government approach. And that's why the integrated review that was published yesterday is so important. Because it doesn't just talk about the military element, and there I can, if you like, I can point to the £5 billion increase in the defence budget and the aspiration for 2.5%. I can point to the doubling of money to deal with the challenge of China, which is going to include things like language learning and making sure that officials and senior officers and so on are much more aware of what China is up to. But I can also point to any number of different areas, like the way in which the Defending Democracy Task Force that I'm lucky enough to chair has set up different ways to approach the challenge of police stations, secret police stations by the Chinese state, or indeed repression by the Chinese state of Chinese citizens here in the UK. So this is a whole-of-government approach, and the Aukus element, the defence element that the Prime Minister was in San Diego signing, is only one aspect of it, and there's much more about this to come. So this is a whole-of-government approach. It involves education, it involves the police, it involves so many different aspects of our intelligence services.
Well, joining us now in the studio, the former newspaper editor, Eve Pollard. What do you make of this alliance, Eve?
Well, it was started in 2021, I think, and for once, let us praise politicians, because for once they're getting it right ahead of the time. I mean, we're hearing that China still insists that Taiwan will one day be theirs, and instead of waiting for something to happen, they have made an alliance between us, America and Australia. They're going to provide this fleet of nuclear subs. It's going to give a lot of jobs to Cumbria and Derby. And also, it is, for once, not waiting for something to happen, but seeing a threat, although Rishi keeps saying, I'm not going to be a hawk, I'm not going to upset the Chinese. Tom Tugendhat doesn't seem to have got that message.
Well, it's going to take 15 years to build these.
It is going to take 15 years to build these. I mean, they must be extraordinary things. Then you have to teach Australians how to crew them.
Yeah. So it's good for jobs, it's good for alliance and, you know, photo ops with two other big nationalities.
But it also is telling the world that we are actually, well, you know, who knows what the Chinese are going to do? They must be watching what is going on between Russia and Ukraine. And Russia probably said, I imagine Putin probably said, we'll be in and out of there in a couple of months. Well, it's not like that, which is brilliant. So I think China is going to wait and see, but they've never made it a secret that they want Taiwan as part of communist China, which it isn't. And I think this happening shows the world that actually we're not just sitting there waiting for something to happen, we're actually being the opposite of waiting for something, going and doing something.
So if you're Taiwan, you feel the rest of the world is looking at you, the rest of the world actually cares.
That's absolutely right, which, of course, if you'd said this about Ukraine 3 years ago, people would have said, oh, no, they'll let them walk in. Yeah. And we did let Russia walk into the Crimea, and that was a terrible mistake, we see in hindsight. So maybe politicians have learned something.
OK.
Also, all those jobs will be good.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, ahead of the Chancellor's budget tomorrow, our Deputy Political Editor, Tom Harwood, has been taking a look at the battle within the Conservative Party over corporation tax.
It was Liz Truss's promise to reverse Rishi Sunak's planned rise in the tax that helped propel her to number 10. And ahead of this week's budget, Tory backbenchers are pushing the government to change tack and not raise taxes on British businesses.
By putting the tax rate up, he will experience falling revenues, not rising revenues. Every time Conservative chancellors have had the courage to cut corporation tax rates, the amount we collect has gone up. And just look at the position in the Republic of Ireland. They have a rate much lower than ours, and they collect 4 times as much business tax per head as we do, because the companies pour into Ireland to invest and set up their HQs. Well, my message to Jeremy Hunt is he's got a portrait of Nigel Lawson hanging on the wall in his study. He says he's a great admirer of Nigel Lawson. Did what Nigel did, Jeremy. Cut the taxes and you'll get more revenue and a happier country.
So how might the Chancellor respond to this pressure? One idea is to mitigate the tax rise by allowing companies to count capital investment against their corporation tax bill. Currently, a policy called the super deduction is in place, although it's due to end next month. Robert Colville of the Centre for Policy Studies believes the Chancellor would be wise to take forward a form of it to mitigate the damage of the corporation tax hike.
The super deduction has had an effect in areas like the north, in the Midlands, in sort of for manufacturing firms. I mean, the evidence is pretty good that it's helped those kind of firms, and of course those are the kind of people the government is quite keen on at the moment. Our modelling shows that in the long term, that doing that for plant and machinery probably adds 1.2% to the country's GDP at a long-term cost of about £2 or £3 billion a year.
And speaking to GB News last week, the Chancellor hinted that this is exactly what he's looking at. Jeremy Hunt told Esther McVeigh and Philip Davies that the headline rate of tax matters less than the effective rate, the amount of tax that is actually paid.
We need to have the lowest effective corporation taxes, because the headline rate, which, by the way, even at 25%, is lower than nearly all our major rivals, France, Germany, and so on. But what actually matters, because a lot of companies are allowed to count their capital expenditure against their corporation tax bill. Now, one of the ways that George Osborne reduced corporation tax headline rates was that he got rid of those capital allowances. But for manufacturing industry, such as AstraZeneca in your part of the world, those capital allowances work. So I would say we do want to bring down our effective corporation tax, the total amount people pay as corporation tax as a proportion of their profits. We do want to bring those down.
It looks like Conservative backbenchers will not get their wish for a full-scale reversal of this rise to corporation tax. But what they might get is some mitigation, a full expensing regime, which might go some way to quell some of that backbench discontent. Tom Harwood, GB News.
Well, let's get some reaction to that from Eve Pollard.
I can't wait for the budget tomorrow.
I know you're excited.
I am.
Why are you excited?
Well, see, when I was a child, I was scarred by the budget because they used to cancel all the programmes on BBC for the day. So children's television, you'd no Blue Peter, you'd no Animal Magic, you'd no anything.
Terrible day.
Terrible. And it's just left me, I've always thought, ooh, the budget day. Anyway, what's your view on budget day?
Well, he's going to upset a lot of Tory members, isn't he? Because he's not going to reduce corporation tax. But it will be irritating if he doesn't reduce it this time and he reduces it next year, and it's too little too late next year, I suspect. But
that's the big thing. That's going to lure us all, isn't it? And the general election is going to influence so many people just prior to casting their vote.
But of course, the general election started now. I mean, the whole of the Labour Party are on manoeuvres. I mean, everybody is helping Keir Starmer. I don't know how thrilled Keir Starmer is with it, but everybody you can think of who's ever been a Labour politician is helping him. It's going to be the most toxic election ever. And I just think next year, if we have another very difficult year, people have had enough of everything being tough.
Yeah, OK, but here we have Leon in Northampton saying, Chairman Hunt will be steady as we go because he'll be saving all the fireworks for the pre-election budget.
Yes. All right, Eve, thank you very much indeed for your take on those. But we've now got
more from Eve
little
later.
Update from Bev and Andrew, who will be joining us at 9:30. I said taking the reins at 9:30 with The Point. What's in the show today?
Good morning. Well, we've got plenty to get through this morning. We've got Vince Cable is going to be in the studio. We're going to be talking about this Fiona Bruce story and the fact that she stood down from this domestic abuse charity. Did she say the wrong thing? Was she not just doing her job and providing a bit of balance?
What do you guys think? I'm interested.
I think she was doing her job as a professional interrogator on Question Time. She said, in context, this was alleged in a book. It happened once. I think she was doing her job. And there's been a huge outcry, and it's unfair. She's a really professional
the big loss
broadcaster.
in all of this is the people whose support she was giving at the charity.
Yeah,
There's a patron for 25 years, and that's exact opposite of what should have come from the intervention that she made.
She did exactly what she should have done in her job. We're also going to be talking about the fallout, of course, because she's BBC, the continuing fallout from the ridiculous capitulation by the BBC to that man, Lineker. I said on the programme yesterday, he can now do no wrong. He's now master of all he surveys. He is.
But I don't know what Bev's view is on it. I mean, you know, as presenters for hire, guns for hire, you know how to play your hand and if you've overplayed it or not. And Match of the Day will go on no matter whether you present it, Andrew presents it, Isabel presents it, or I present it. It will go on and on.
I don't know if it'll go on if I present it.
Four of us, you would do the best job at that. I guarantee that, Holmes.
Eve, I'm putting forward Eve Pollard to be presenter of Match of the Day. It's only, can you manage with the fee?
Too much about football.
Yeah, it's only £1.3 million a year. Eve, could you manage on the £1.3 million fee?
I could manage.
Could you manage?
But I can't see. My point is, why is Gary, and I like Gary and everything else, super duper, but why is he such a protected species on this? Because it does not matter if he presents it or...
Well, we saw
Alan Shearer.
500,000 more people watch it when he wasn't presenting it.
I like the fact I like to live in a world where people are allowed to express their opinions.
Yeah.
And if his contract didn't restrict him from doing so, then he's free to say what he wants, you know. I like the fact that we work on a channel when we're encouraged to have opinions. And I know it's different with the BBC. I guess what we established yesterday is that I don't hold the BBC in particularly high esteem anyway in terms of its impartiality. So I was like, well, I didn't think they were impartial anyway.
Remember me and you used to work there?
We did.
We'll not be doing that again.
We did a show together on 5 Live for a few years.
13 minutes past 9 o'clock. So you've got Andrew and Beverly from 9:30. You've got Eve Pollard next. She's sticking around, giving her thoughts on Gary Lineker, more the Gary Lineker row as he returns to Match of the Day.
First and foremost, I am a GB News fan, and I was before I was working here. Just love the fact that we're asking the questions that a lot of establishment media won't ask.
With a bit of a twist, we not only want to inform you, but we want to keep you entertained.
It's worth the drive because you get in and the team's all ready and waiting, they're itching to go, and it's a proper little family.
GB News is the people's channel.
It's the audience that makes the programme sing.
We're giving our viewers and our listeners a voice. I see the thousands of your letters, tweets, emails, you name it, coming in.
Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it?
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent you.
It's time for something different. It's time for GB News. I'm very patriotic. I believe in Britain. Our best days lie ahead.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Join us here on GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
I'm Andrew Doyle. Join me at 7 o'clock every Sunday night for Free Speech Nation, the show where I tackle the week's biggest stories in politics and current affairs with the help of my 2 comedian panellists and a variety of special guests.
Free Speech Nation, Sunday nights from 7 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Here on GB News Live, we'll be keeping you in the picture, finding out what's happening across the country and finding out why it matters to you. We'll have the facts fast with our team of reporters and specialist correspondents. Wherever it's happening, we'll be there from 12 noon on TV, radio and online. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michael Portillo. Join me on GB News on a Sunday morning for topical discussion, debate, arts and culture, and sometimes even some ethical dilemmas.
I don't always agree with you, Michael.
Michael Portillo, Sundays on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you. She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go. But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway, Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Very nice to see you again. 17 minutes past 9 o'clock. Unemployment figures released this morning show that it has remained unchanged. It is
3.7% in the 3 months to January, but the ONS stats did show a fall in job vacancies and a drop in real wages, and worryingly, a record number of people out of work due to long-term sickness.
Well, we believe the Shadow Economic Secretary to the Treasury, Tulip Siddiq, there she is, joins us now from Westminster.
Good morning to you. Are you concerned by these figures out this morning from the ONS?
I am concerned about them. We've seen that 234,000 people are out of work than before the pandemic, and that real wages have fallen as well. So, of course, I'm concerned. One of the main things I'm concerned about is that the employment schemes that the government seems to have, they don't seem to be working. So people in my constituency are struggling because they can't find jobs. But yet the government's talking about all these employment training schemes that they have. They don't just seem to be working.
Today, boosting the tax-free allowance in a bid to try and get the over 50s back into the workplace, the so-called doctor's tax, because we see the situation where, for example, the NHS is seeing this mass exodus of consultants because it simply doesn't pay to stay. And this is addressing that square on.
I don't know if you have the exact details of what they're proposing to put in the budget in terms of pensions. When I asked this morning, it didn't feel like they did have the figures. Anything that comes out that supports older people and pensioners, of course, we would be interested in seeing. But I have to say, before I commit to supporting it, I would like to see what the exact details are, because we don't want there to be a catch somewhere for people who are older and out of work. One of the things that we have said from the Labour Party is that we would introduce local targeted support and reform job centres to make sure that people are back in work, especially those who are on long-term sickness and haven't been able to get back in. But in terms of the budget, if there is something that helps people save more, that's something that we would consider supporting, but I've got to see the details first.
OK, the Office for National Statistics also giving an update on the number of working days lost in January due to the strikes, 220,000. Of course, lots of Labour MPs and Labour supporters right behind those strikes, and it's costing the economy dear.
We've always said that people should have the right to strike. Of course they should have the right to strike. That's always what we've said in the Labour Party. But this, let me be absolutely clear about these strikes. The failure to stop these strikes lies squarely at the government's door. Rishi Sunak should have got round the table with all the junior doctors that are striking, the teachers that are striking, and reach some sort of negotiation, and that has not been done. People have the right to strike if their conditions are poor, if the pay is poor, but it's the job of government to get round the table with them and sort out some sort of compromise, and we haven't seen that happen.
Haven't they, though, from the government to say, look, if you pause your strike action, then we can continue those conversations. The Royal College of Nursing agreed to that, but the National Education Union, so militant, some people would say, that they refused to suspend those strikes, hugely disruptive to working families. And of course, no negotiation can be done then.
Both my children are off school tomorrow and the day after. I'm a Shadow Treasury Minister, and the budget is tomorrow, as you know. Of course it's disruptive to people's life. But do I think they have the right to strike? Of course I think they have the right to strike. If your conditions are so poor and there's a recruitment and retention problem in the sector, then we should make sure that teachers have the right to strike. But the truth is that they feel that their concerns haven't been heard. What I can tell you safely, having spoken to teachers in my constituency and my children's school, is that no one goes on strike on a whim. It's a last resort. They do it genuinely because they feel they have no choice and their voices haven't been heard. So the government needs to get their act together, sit round the table and speak to the unions, but also speak to proper teachers and speak to them about what the right pay should be.
Tulip Siddiq, Shadow Treasury Minister. We'll leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for joining us.
Thank you, and thank you, Ms. Siddiq, for braving the wind and the rain out there. It makes you think what it'll be like at things like Cheltenham today. Eve Pollard with us in the studios. Tulip Siddiq talked about teacher strikes. We talked about doctors going on strikes. Professional people who just don't seem to be taken seriously, that they're worth anything.
Well, I think that they probably feel it. I think certainly some junior doctors have a terrible time of it, and it's very, very difficult when you're starting. You're not earning the high salaries. Some do better than others. But you've just spent 7 years learning how to do this. And I think that they have been slightly taken for granted. But, of course, they're now asking for 35%, which is out of the ballpark.
I get that, but 35% of nothing is nothing. You know, if they're on 14 grand a year, 20 grand a year, they're entitled to be asking for 35%, surely.
At the bottom of the thing, yes, I agree. But, of course, junior doctor goes on for quite a while being a junior doctor, and their salary does go up. But I think it's very, very clear that we need them. We need more of them, in fact. We should be training more.
Gary Lineker does very well from his potato crisps. He does very well from presenting matches. Don't laugh. I'd take it. I'd do it.
Yeah, and force yourself to eat the odd crisp, I suppose, as well.
And he hosts The Dream Job on Match of the Day at 1.45 million a year.
I think it's 3.5. Let's not quibble, though.
OK, let's not quibble, right? What do you think?
Well, it's interesting. First of all, it's going on and on and on. I'll be fascinated to ask other editors who are editing now, is it selling newspapers? Because it's actually gone on for days.
Doing very well on our digital, online.
Well, people are fascinated on either side. People who totally support him, which I guess is a lot of people at the BBC. So we have to look at the BBC about its impartiality anyway, because if you've got a whole group of people going for one political idea, it's quite difficult to be contra that if you're working for the BBC. But also, my feeling is this is an organisation where the people at the very top are obviously not totally au fait with what's going on about putting a programme out. You learned when you were doing a newspaper, if you didn't have a paper to bring out, if you were going to be late, if you were going to... People want to do the work they've got to do, and I think there's chaos in that sport department. I think Gary Lineker is a cheeky chappie. I think there has to be a clear rule from the BBC about people who work for the BBC and their partiality, and he may not like it, but I think social media now is so important.
So it matters to you that even though he's a sports presenter, he should not have political views. He shouldn't be airing them publicly.
Well, look at what's happened to Fiona Bruce today. Look at the swelling of things on social media. It's probably the height of social media in the next 2 or 3 years because everybody's got a phone that can do it. It's dangerous. He's got an enormous following. I mean, I'm the mother and the grandmother of football fanatics. And kids will try and somehow get it or get their parents to actually record that programme, watch it at 7 on Sunday morning. Keeps them quiet for a few bits. I mean, he's very talented, but it's an extraordinary programme because it just shows you, it does what Sunday newspapers used to do, gives you your team, shows you what happened on Saturday. It's on a Saturday night. More of us are at home on a Saturday night. Weather's bad, there's less money around, and it matters. He's got a fantastically powerful position. And more people, I guess, watch his programme than watch the news.
Well, I think the one thing we have realised at the end of all of this is that he does have a fantastically powerful position.
Sure.
And it's 1-0 to him, I would
it
say.
It is, definitely. But, you know, he's a cheeky chappie. People quite like that.
They do.
Thank
Eve,
you.
thank you.
Quite like you. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks for coming in.
And that's it from us this morning. We'll be back bright and early at 6 o'clock. But coming up next, it's To The Point with Bev Turner and Andrew Pearce.
Very good morning. That's right. We've got a huge amount to get through in the next 2.5 hours, I think, haven't we?
We are. We're talking about the Stop the Boats policy, which sailed through its first stage in the Commons last night, a very tiny Tory rebellion. Labour, of course, voted solidly against it, so round one to Rishi Sunak.
That's right. We're also going to be having Vince Cable is going to be in the studio, isn't he? We've got fantastic guests this morning. We've got Amy Nicole and Sean Bailey. They are always brilliant, insightful, really great value on all the big stories of the day.
And of course, we can't get away from Gary Lineker. Eamonn said 1-0 to Gary Lineker over the BBC. I think 4-0 to Gary Lineker. Humiliated to Gary Lineker. Gary Lineker has humiliated the BBC. He's got everything he wants, and he's cocking a snook at the Beeb and us as licensed pairs.
That's right. And make sure you let us know what you want to tell us this morning. gbviews@gbnews.uk is the email address. We want to hear from you, and also on Twitter @GBNews.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by Headliners on TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting